Chapter 1849. The more he read, the more Xia Hanyang sneered, coveting his woman, and coveting her since the first year of high school, especially when you're studying. You look so good and serious. I'm second in the grade. I'll try my best to catch up with you. Please give me a chance to like you. The second place in the grade blinded Xia Hanyang. He thought of her whispering in his ear that she liked boys with good grades. His heart skipped a few beats. He didn't think much about it. But when a boy with good grades suddenly gave her a love letter, only now did he truly feel it. Wasn't the condition of good grades rejecting him? He was the last in the grade now, and the last in the school. Xia Hanyang realized what Wei Wei Bai meant. He tore up the love letter little by little with a cold face. Then he said, "Drag the second place in the grade here. Let me see how good his grades are." The two lackeys behind him nodded and went to drag him away. They would be surprised if Xia Hanyang attended the class. It was normal for him to teach people a lesson. Bai Weiwei calmly attended half of the class. Xia Hanyang appeared again. He was wiping the back of his hand with a handkerchief. The back of his hand was a little red, as if he had hit something hard. Then he walked into the classroom with a cold face. The teacher turned a blind eye to his behavior and continued to teach calmly. Xia Hanyang walked over like a gust of wind and pulled the chair behind Wei Wei Bai. The chair creaked, which was very scary. Wei Wei Bai felt a little numb in her back. Xia Hanyang stared at her, suppressing his irritation. Someone sent her a love letter. Was she happy? How long had she known that man? The first place in the grade and the second place in the grade were a good match. Ha! Xia Hanyang grabbed a pen from the table next to him, snatched the book, and then coldly turned the pages. It was just studying. He didn't want to study. With his brain, how could he not learn? The students at the table next to him, Xia Hanyang, opened the book. 3 seconds, 10 seconds, 1 minute, 3 minutes later, he broke the pen expressionlessly. Why did he want to sleep? Wasn't it just studying? The clown girl liked people with good grades. He couldn't be defeated by a few books. Underachievers were very ignorant and thought that failure in learning was because they did not study hard. It wasn't that he couldn't learn it. Then Xia Hanyang continued to read and soon fell asleep. He did not sleep last night as he was thinking about Wei Wei Bai excitedly. In the end, he was still alive and kicking today, but after reading for a while, he was directly hypnotized asleep. This sleep allowed Wei Wei Bai to have a good lesson. He stayed up until school ended. Wei Wei Bai knew that she had gained 2 more points. He was in a good mood. Wei Wei Bai smiled in satisfaction, packed her bag, and left. However, just as she was about to get up, a hand pressed down on her shoulder from behind. That hand was like a soldering iron, hard and strong, pressing her firmly into the seat. Soon, everyone in the classroom had left. Wei Wei Bai frowned. "Student Xia, school is over." Xia Hanyang, who had been sleeping behind her, finally raised his head. His voice was hoarse because he had just woken up. "Yes, someone sent you a love letter. Are you happy?" Wei Wei Bai said calmly. "No." Xia Hanyang said, "His grades are very good." Wei Wei Bai said, "His grades are worse than mine." Xia Hanyang was speechless. With cold eyes, he sized up her beautiful neck and ears and found that there was nothing unnatural about them. Then he said with a sigh of relief, "Oh, I thought that girls would like a love letter sent to them. Crossover system, idol come here. Crossover system, idol come here. Slash crossover system, idol come here. Crossover system, idol come here. Slash crossover system, idol come here." Chapter 1850. Wei Wei Bai finally turned her head. In the dim light of the setting sun, her face was hazy and a little shy. "Xia Hanyang, do you want a love letter?" Xia Hanyang opened his mouth and was stunned for a moment. Then he snorted, "Childish thing." Wei Wei Bai nodded. "It's really childish. Can you let go of me?" Xia Hanyang loosened his fingers, and she was about to leave with her school bag. However, before she could take 2 steps, he suddenly said, "Of course, if it's for you, it doesn't matter if I'm childish for once." Wei Wei Bai paused and looked back to see Xia Hanyang holding the back of his head with both hands. He looked cold, but his eyes were wandering, which seemed a little unnatural. "A love letter sounds good. You could try writing one for me." It seemed that this little cake was quite sweet. "You can buy one for me later." Wei Wei Bai looked at him silently for a while. Then she suddenly let go of her school bag and took out a pen and paper from it. Then she began to write on the table next to him. Xia Hanyang just said it casually, but when she began to write with her head down, his eyes stayed on her, and the sound of her pen rang in his ears. The silent classroom, the quiet girl, and the dim light of the sun. Xia Hanyang suddenly felt that this scene was indescribably clean and beautiful. The touch of youth made him a little dull for a moment, and he just stared at her blankly. After Wei Wei Bai finished writing, she folded the paper into a paper crane, then walked to Xia Hanyang and whispered, "Open your hands." Xia Hanyang's fingers trembled and opened. Wei Wei Bai put the paper crane in his hand and smiled. "Open it when you get home." Then she ignored the silly Xia Hanyang, turned around, and left with her school bag. Xia Hanyang held the paper crane in his hand. Was this the love letter she gave him? It looked childish, but it made his mind surge. What surged in his mind was sweet water. Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 30. Wei Wei Bai was expressionless when she heard the increase in favorability. She was used to Xia Hanyang's random increase in favorability. He was such an easy target. This made her feel even more helpless about the side mission. The system watched what she wrote on the paper crane. It couldn't help but say, "The male lead won't go crazy, right?" Wei Wei Bai said, "It's fine. I'm just urging him to study hard." After writing the love letter, she handed it to Xia Hanyang. Xia Hanyang's top student index had become -10. Not only did the favorable impression points increase, but it also increased the negative score. How great was that? The system opened its third eye and saw Xia Hanyang, who was holding 1,000 paper cranes in a daze in the classroom. The smile on his face was so big that everyone could see his big white teeth. It couldn't bear to look at Xia Hanyang, so it decided not to look at him. Such a foolish male lead was too much of an eyesore. When Xia Hanyang came out of the classroom cautiously with 1,000 paper cranes in his hands, a few of his followers were smoking and chatting under a big tree. Beside them was the second-place student who had been beaten to the point of being on the verge of death. Xia Hanyang came out. A few of his followers came over and said, "Brother Xia, let's go racing tonight." Xia Hanyang glanced at them coldly. "Get lost, I'm going home." The followers had strange expressions on their faces. He went to school obediently and went home obediently after class. Was Brother Xia possessed by some unknown object? Xia Hanyang couldn't be bothered to look at them. He raised the corners of his mouth and couldn't help but laugh happily as he ran out. He planned to go home and read the love letter. It wasn't that he hadn't received love letters before, but those love letters were all disposed of in the trash before they reached his hands. This was the first time he found the word love letter particularly pleasing to the eye. After he rushed home, he immediately washed his hands. He carefully opened the paper crane. The first thing he saw was, "Hello, student Xia." It started in a proper manner. The next sentence was, "I like you." When the ugly girl wrote, "I like you," her face was probably red. When Xia Hanyang saw the words below student Xia, he was speechless. The time in the cafeteria was too short, so I didn't explain the definition of derivative to you clearly. The function y is equal to the derivative of f(x) at. See, the underline x is 2, the middle of the triangle. So we can get triple x, gradually triple x. Obviously, we can get triple x. It's very simple, do you understand? Xia Hanyang was speechless. Then he silently pinched the paper. He understood. He wanted to strangle Wei Wei Bai to death. //. Chapter 1851. When Wei Wei Bai returned home, she heard the system say, "I need to do a report." What report? The system flipped through the notification. The annual report of the system. Every system needs to be there. Wei Wei Bai frowned. How long will it take? The system said, "I'll try to come back as soon as possible. If it's not necessary, I won't go." Wei Wei Bai said, "Just go. There shouldn't be any problems in this plane." Xia Hanyang was an idiot. The only thing that could threaten her was the index punishment. However, she should be able to maintain balance by accumulating a few points. Besides, this plane was not a cultivation plane, nor a ghost plane. It was a normal school plane, a realistic society. For Wei Wei Bai, this plane was very safe. The system said, "I'll go then. I'll turn on the automatic notification." If you encounter any danger, just call my name. I'll do my best to come back. Wei Wei Bai nodded. Don't worry. How many planes have I been? As long as it's not a nuclear explosion, I can handle normal accidents. There are already so many planes. She had been through everything. Therefore, leaving the system for a while would not be the end of her immediately. The system smiled and turned on the automatic notification. There was also a voice transmission that could be heard when she called his name. Wei Wei Bai walked to the ground floor of the slums and called softly, 004. After a while, the system said, What's wrong? What can't you handle? I'm here. Wei Wei Bai almost ran into the wall. She was just trying to call it. The system actually responded in such a hurry. Wei Wei Bai said, Nothing. I'm just practicing calling your name. The system sighed in relief. I just set off. When I heard you, I came immediately. All right, I forgot to tell you. Because all the systems are attending the meeting, other than the main mission strategy, all other activities will be temporarily frozen. Wei Wei Bai said, Frozen? The system said, the side missions will be temporarily suspended. They will only be activated again after the meeting. During this period, the academic genius index won't decrease or increase, and there won't be any punishment missions. When Wei Wei Bai heard that, she felt that this was a good thing. She had recently become a role model because of the side missions. Moreover, she didn't have to worry about Xia Hanyang's stupidity. So when the system was gone, wasn't it a holiday? Wei Wei Bai immediately said happily, Have a safe trip. It would be best if you could hook up with a super rich woman. The system said, Am I the kind of person who would hook up with rich women? Usually, it's the rich women who come to seduce me. Goodbye. After saying that, the system hurriedly ran off again. He could still catch the last public bus. Wei Wei Bai stood in place and thought for a while. It turned out that the world of the system was very similar to the world of humans. There were reports, meetings, and supermarkets. He was really curious about what the system looked like. It was a square box with an intelligence index that looked like a notebook. Wei Wei Bai returned to the dilapidated house. She went to boil some hot water. She planned to take a bath and then make some instant noodles to eat. Before she went home, she went to the internet cafe for a while and looked up tutoring jobs. She had already contacted a few companies to teach elementary school or middle school students on the weekends. Her results were very convincing. It was very beneficial for her to get the tutoring opportunity. The classes on the weekends and on the weekends were enough for her to live normally. Wei Wei Bai finished boiling the hot water and put it in the bathroom. She closed the door and then started to take a bath. // Chapter 1852. Xia Hanyang kicked the chair angrily. Do you know how to drive? Is the car broken? How can you drive like this? Are you worthy of my car? The driver trembled. Young master, this road is a bit difficult to drive. Xia Hanyang's face was so gloomy that it could scare a child to cry. Difficult? How difficult? Do you want to push the car if it's difficult? The driver immediately said, I'll speed up. Xia Hanyang really did ask him to push the car. Xia Hanyang rubbed the paper crane in his hand. He wanted to tear it several times, but he couldn't bear to do so. But looking at it, he felt suffocated as if he had been filled with cement. He was so depressed that he wanted to jump, hit people, and smash things. This was the first time that he had been teased. He was the one who teased him. Xia Hanyang looked out of the window with gloomy eyes. Do you think I can't find you after school? He went directly to the school to get the admission file. Knowing the home address, he came. But Wei Wei Bai's admission file was too simple. There wasn't even a number. But he didn't see the ugly girl holding A. But it was impossible that she didn't even have a home phone number. Impossible. She must have deliberately left it out. Was she afraid that he would call her? Xia Hanyang snorted. She must have not expected that he would directly come to her house. Thinking of this, Xia Hanyang kicked the driver's chair fiercely. Drive faster. The driver said, Okay. In such an alley, the driver was about to cry. Because the car was scratched. More importantly, he was afraid that someone would be killed. It was not easy to get to the address downstairs. Xia Hanyang didn't realize it until now. He looked at the scenery outside the window. The shabby street lights were flickering, the muddy road, and the old buildings seemed to be from the last century. He looked at the place that looked like a dangerous building. Xia Hanyang's face darkened, and his voice was so cold that it made people's scalp numb. What the hell is this place? Wei Weibai didn't fill in an address casually to fool people, did she? Was this a place where people lived? The driver wiped the sweat from his face and said, "Young master, this place is dirty. Let's go." Xia Hanyang stared at the dilapidated building and at the few electric lights in it. Not many people live there, but there are still people who live there. Clown Girl lives on the 5th floor? Suddenly, he saw a drunken man stumbling into the building. The smell of alcohol made Xia Hanyang frown in disgust. He drank too, but he would not look so disgusting when he drank. What kind of people lived here? Xia Hanyang didn't believe that Wei Weibai lived here, but his feet couldn't help but move forward. The expensive handmade shoes were so dirty that they couldn't be looked at when they stepped on the muddy road. Xia Hanyang looked indifferent. The driver was afraid that something would happen to him, so he immediately followed him. The stewards, drivers, and bodyguard behind Xia Hanyang were all specially selected. They were all very skilled. After all, what Xia Hanyang did was so annoying. Master Xia was worried every day that his grandson would be beaten by someone with a cloth bag over his head. Therefore, the people around Xia Hanyang all knew martial arts. It was to prevent Xia Hanyang from being beaten to death when he bullied people. The old master at home was also worried sick about his unfilial grandson. Xia Hanyang saw the dangerous building without an elevator, so he finally gritted his teeth and said, "What the hell is this place? How can there be such a poor place?" The driver behind him smiled bitterly. "Young master, there are a lot of places like this. The rent is the cheapest, but it is also very dangerous. It is the slum area of the city." Of course, the normal name would not be the slum area. This was the local name. /T. Chapter 1853. This kind of place was too cheap and chaotic. Therefore, people from all walks of life could come here. The crime rate was also very high. Xia Hanyang, the slums? He had never been to such a place before. Therefore, when he came here for the first time, he saw the extremely dirty corridor. Even the lights were broken. It smelled bad. The walls were also stained with old yellow oil. All kinds of cockroaches and rats scurried away from him. Xia Hanyang felt that Wei Weibai could not live in such a place. How could she live in such a place? The annoyance of being teased turned into an incomparably oppressive feeling. Was this depression worried? Xia Hanyang frowned. He was still not sure if the address was wrong, but since they had already gone upstairs, he decided to confirm it first. Xia Hanyang even hoped that Wei Weibai had given a false address. When the water fell to the ground, Wei Weibai poured away the bath water. The only clothes left were relatively thin. She reluctantly took out an old one, then wiped herself clean and put on the clothes. She washed her school uniform while she was at it. She put on a white cotton dress and walked out after putting it on. Where did the slippers go? Wei Weibai squatted under the chair and looked for the slippers. Suddenly, the sound of the door opening came from behind. Without the system's reminder, Wei Weibai did not react for a moment, because when the system was around, it would immediately tell her if anyone approached her. She was mentally prepared, although she knew that the system had gone to a meeting. But a long-time habit formed a terrible inertia. When Wei Weibai heard the sound of the door opening, she hesitated for a moment and did not immediately turn around. Meanwhile, the middle-aged drunkard who stumbled in was cursing and swearing. "B*TCH, you tricked me into investing. Fuck you. When I make a profit, you will all be trash." Then, the drunkard suddenly saw Wei Weibai squatting on the ground. She had just taken a shower. Her black hair fell to her waist. The fine water droplets fell on the cotton dress, soaking it. It was a very conservative dress, but that thin and beautiful back still made the drunkard's eyes light up. An evil and greedy look appeared in his eyes. Was this not the burden of his dead wife? Right, he seemed to have remembered something. The debt collectors were in hot pursuit. He seemed to have pawned Wei Weibai to them. Wei Weibai had just reached adulthood this year. If he sold her at this age, in addition to paying off his debts, he could also get some gambling money. The drunkard remembered this. Suddenly, he walked over happily. "Daughter, you're going to be sold anyway. Take pity on me and comfort me." The drunkard was Wei Wei Bai's stepfather. She stumbled over to grab Wei Wei Bai. In his heart, he was expecting an outsider to benefit. Why don't I do it first and let her become a real woman? Then, he would sell her to pay off his debt. Wei Wei Bai finally reacted. She thought quickly and knew who this guy was. Then, she saw the greed in his eyes. She narrowed her eyes in understanding, and her eyes were incomparably cold. It even carried a gloomy, murderous aura. Sell it? Comfort him? What kind of person was she? She could basically guess what this guy had done. Pay off his debt, or sell her to a procurist for gambling money. And this guy was planning to do some heartless things to her. Bai Weiwei said neither coldly nor lightly. Scum. The drunkard stopped in his tracks and shook his heavy head. Wait, she was scolding him. Why was his usually submissive stepdaughter suddenly so tough? He immediately said fiercely, Burden, you dare to scold me. At https://www.sashu.com/full text at https://www.sashu.com download at https://www.sashu.com at https://m/sashu.com. To facilitate your next reading, you can click on the Chapter 1854. He reached out and was about to hit Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai raised her eyebrows and took 3 steps back. Then she walked directly to the small kitchen by the window. There was only a small space in the kitchen, and it was all by the window. There was a dusty plastic flower by the window sill. When the original owner's mother was still alive, this house was well taken care of. Even if it was poor, it was dilapidated, and the ceiling was leaking. Even if the floor tiles were cracked, the original owner's mother could still fix it. She even bought secondhand tablecloths and tidied up the old secondhand tables. She even made wind chimes and hung them outside the window as decorations. But because she met this man, she ended up like that. This dilapidated house lacked many things, and the kitchen also lacked many kitchen utensils. The only thing that was not lacking was warmth and love. But since she died, this family completely fell apart. Cold was the only warmth in this dilapidated house. Wei Wei Bai thought that this was why the original owner worked so hard and used all her strength to study and become a top student. Because only then could she leave this place. Only then could there be a glimmer of warmth in her hopeless life. The original owner did not even dare to think about revenge, because it would destroy her life. This was what the original owner's mother did not want to see the most. Wei Wei Bai did not have so many thoughts and a kind heart, but she would still continue to be a top student. Wei Wei Bai walked quickly and looked at the man coldly. After transmigrating, he rushed to be a top student. She also did not see this scum of a stepfather. Although she knew that the original owner had a hard life and that her mother was miserably harmed by this scum, she was not a saint and did not care much about these things. As long as they did not provoke her, she was too lazy to care too much. But this guy sent himself to her door and even had ideas about her. Wei Wei Bai expressed that she would not be polite with him since he dared to bully her. She looked at the guy coldly. The man stumbled over. He said fiercely, "Who gives you food and shelter? You even dare to scold me. You're rebelling." The drunk guy's brain was slow. Even when it came to scolding people, it was just a few sentences. Wei Wei Bai kept retreating as she circled around him. He was not enraged, nor did he do anything unnecessary. It was to avoid the opponent's movements as much as possible. He didn't come to her. She pretended that he didn't exist. But since he was the one who provoked her, she wasn't afraid. Bai Weiwei's footsteps quickly retreated. Her stepfather was furious and couldn't catch her. He suddenly quickened his pace and pounced forward. Wei Wei Bai did not run. Just when he thought he was going to catch her. Her expression was calm and natural. He looked at the fallen man. Wei Wei Bai began to tidy up the place. Suddenly, there was a loud knock on the door. Wei Wei Bai, are you there? I'm here for you. It was a familiar and arrogant voice. Wei Wei Bai paused and immediately put down the chair. She immediately turned around and frowned. Xiao Hanyang was here. He had to pretend not to be at home. He was exposed as soon as he opened the door. But Xiao Hanyang was not that kind of person. although he didn't quite believe that Wei Wei Bai lived in such a shabby place. But what if it was true? Thinking of this, Xia Hanyang knocked harder and harder on the door. I'm not going to open the door. I'm going to break the door. Wei Wei Bai knew that this guy really dared to break the door, and the door was actually not locked. Xia Hanyang could enter by turning the doorknob. Wei Wei Bai glanced at her stepfather on the ground and couldn't help but frown. / T. Chapter 1855. Xia Hanyang had broken in. If he saw the scene of her killing someone, his favorability would probably fall into the negatives. No one liked psychopathic murderers. Even if they were scumbags, Wei Wei Bai looked at the vibrating door. Suddenly, she reached out and tore open her collar. She tore open a big hole, revealing her snow-white back. Then she pinched the bruise on her skin. She grabbed the torn dress with one hand and smeared the scumbag stepfather's blood on her feet and fingers with the other hand. And on her face. Yes, Wei Wei Bai made up her mind and scratched the corner of her mouth with her fingers. Blood flowed out. It was her last chance. She was betting on Xia Hanyang's youthful and beautiful feelings, and his desire to protect her. Xia Hanyang knocked on the door for a long time. It was very quiet inside. It was extremely creepy. Xia Hanyang knew very well that there was someone at the door, because the light was on, and outside the door, he glanced at the wall. The door panel was covered with red paint. It was written with terrible debt collection words. The closer he got to this place, the more frightened and gloomy his heart became. Did she really live here? This kind of dangerous, dilapidated, and dirty place? She clearly looked clean, and the smell on her body was particularly clear and pleasant. How could she be involved with such a damn place? Xia Hanyang knocked on the door for a long time, unwilling to leave. He suddenly lost his temper. He raised his foot and began to kick the door. There was someone at home. Why didn't she open the door? Today, he must know whether Wei Wei Bai lived here or not. If it wasn't, he would find her tomorrow to settle the score with her for pranking him. If yes, of course, he would carry her away immediately. Could anyone live in this kind of place? She dared to live here. She was courting death. Xia Hanyang kicked the door several times. His feet were numb. He kicked the door so fiercely, but no one opened the door to see, because there were very few residents in this building. And even if someone lived here, they wouldn't be nosy and open the door to see. Who knew if he would provoke something that shouldn't be provoked? Seeing him kicking the door, the driver was worried that he would hurt his foot. He immediately said, "How about I find the key?" Dangerous buildings were dangerous buildings. There must be a landlord. All he had to do was find the landlord and look for the keys. Xia Hanyang was about to roar at him. However, he suddenly wrinkled his nose. There was a fishy smell in the air. The smell of blood? His eyes suddenly darkened as he stared at the door. The smell of blood? A sudden force caused him to kick open the door. He immediately said, "Wei Wei Bai." His cry was stuck in his throat. The first thing he saw was blood. The ground was covered in blood, and then there was a twitching man on the verge of death. Beside the blood, the girl kneeling on the ground stared blankly at the twitching body. She was no longer as cold and arrogant as she usually was. She wasn't the kind of girl who, after pranking him, had a teasing look in her eyes but still held back her laughter. Instead, it was despair. Pale, fragile. Her tattered clothes fell to the ground, and a large patch of her back was stained with blood. It was like a wound on the brink of death when one's wings were torn off. She didn't react to his arrival at all. Instead, she stared blankly at the man. He was about to die. That wound had been delayed until now, and there was no way to treat it. Xia Hanyang's throat seemed to be blocked by something, and he lost his strength to walk. He walked over to Wei Wei Bai with weak legs. Then he saw the bruises on her body. The realization came like a storm, causing his eyes to suddenly become bloodshot. What did he do to you? This scene made him realize what had happened at once. She had been bullied. Wei Wei Bai suddenly woke up. She hugged her chest with both hands and looked up weakly. She trembled. "I didn't kill him. I just told him not to come over. I told him not to come over, but he ran into me himself." Xia Hanyang saw that she had broken down, and tears flowed from her eyes. He saw her battered face, the wound at the corner of her mouth, and the blood stains on her face. Xia Hanyang found that his fingers were trembling, but he didn't dare to show the slightest bit of anger. Instead, he took off his clothes and put them on her. Then he hugged her tightly. "It's okay, Wei Wei. It's okay." In his arms, she was incomparably cold and trembling nonstop. She broke down and sobbed, as if she wanted to hide in his arms and ask for help. But she couldn't speak and could only keep sobbing. This kind of broken request for help was piercing to the bone. Xiao Hanyang found that tears were falling from his eyes. He hugged her tightly. Her body was covered in blood and was bullied by others. His eyes turned red and vicious, but his movements were surprisingly gentle. "It's okay, you'll be fine." Ding. The male lead's favorability has increased to 40//T. Chapter 1856. It was raining when they went back. It was already late at night. Xiao Hanyang carried Wei Wei by away. To deal with the old man, he set up an apartment not far from the school. Although he didn't go to school most of the time, it was easy for him to show up at school a few times a month, because he lived close to the school. This was the first time Xiao Hanyang was so grateful that he got an apartment outside instead of going home to live with a bunch of relatives. Otherwise, he could only stay in a hotel with Wei Wei Bai, and Wei Wei Bai's current situation was not suitable for a crowded place. Xiao Hanyang dealt with the slum matter very rationally. He cleaned up the scene and asked the driver to take her away. He also checked whether there were any surveillance cameras nearby. He was terrifyingly rational about these things. It could even be said that he was cold. So he went through the matter in his mind and found that there were no flaws. So he took her home. Wei Wei Bai was still in a daze. She curled up under his wide, long-sleeved pullover, looking terribly lonely and fragile. Her black hair was a little messy behind her, and her face was pale with panic. It seemed that she hadn't recovered from the tragic scene. Xiao Hanyang put her on the sofa, then squatted down and looked at her seriously. "You're safe. It's okay, Wei Wei." This was the first time he had told someone that he was fine, because he couldn't find a better line for a while. Wei Wei Bai finally reacted. Her eyelashes fluttered slightly, and she looked up at him blankly. Xiao Hanyang finally saw her normal reaction. When he brought her back, she barely reacted at all. She was like a doll that had lost its soul when he carried her all the way back. No matter how cold and indifferent a person was, they would definitely be frightened when they encountered such a thing. When he saw the scar on her lips, his anger was unusually sharp. This sharp feeling made him want to kill someone. When he was in that house, he just acted on his cold instincts at first. But when he had finished arranging everything, he had no choice but to leave. He suddenly realized how much she had been hurt. Only then would he do such a thing. He would only use a knife to defend himself if he was forced into a corner. Xiao Hanyang shuddered at the thought of it, as well as the crazed anger in his heart. Wei Wei Bai finally saw his face clearly. Her voice was hoarse and weak. "Student Xia." Xiao Hanyang felt that the way he addressed her was both funny and cute. She mostly addressed him as Student Xia. In the past, he was very unhappy when she called him that. He had so many classmates. "Who are you calling? The whole school is filled with your classmates." This name was not special at all, but her fragile way of addressing him made him unable to get angry. Xiao Hanyang answered in a low voice. "Yes, are you hungry?" She probably hadn't eaten anything since school was over. Therefore, just now, he ordered someone to go to the 5-star hotel next door and watch the chef cook. Wei Wei Bai shook her head. She seemed to have returned to normal. "Can I borrow a phone?" Xiao Hanyang picked up the phone from his pocket and handed it to Wei Wei Bai. "Do you want to make a call?" Wei Wei Bai took the phone and started to dial the number. Her voice was trembling. "Yes, I want to turn myself in." Xiao Hanyang was stunned. Seeing that she was about to dial the number, he quickly snatched the phone from her hand. Then, he looked at the number that had not been dialed yet. His heavy heart finally returned to its original position. Then, his emotions exploded. // Chapter 1857. Xiao Hanyang smashed the phone against the wall. The phone immediately broke. Even the battery cover flew out. It was obvious that he had used a lot of strength. Wei Wei Bai trembled and looked at him in fear. Xiao Hanyang reached out to grab her, but she suddenly hid back and shrank to the corner of the sofa, looking at him in disbelief. His violence scared her. Xiao Hanyang was full of anger, but when he was looked at by her timid eyes, he became a soft-footed shrimp. but he still couldn't suppress the anger in his voice. It's faster for you to commit suicide. You know that you're finished once you make this call. Wei Weibai looked at him blankly and finally said reluctantly, but Xia Hanyang said, no buts. You're not allowed to call. Are you worried that the truth will be exposed? With me around, you won't even have a chance to die. The fear in Wei Weibai's eyes turned into confusion. Why are you so good to me? Xia Hanyang was still angry. Isn't that obvious? Normal people know what it means when a man is good to a woman. Do you think I'm doing charity? I might as well donate directly. Wei Weibai hesitated for a while before saying, do you like me? Xia Hanyang said, of course, if I don't like you, I'll be cheap. Wei Weibai, Xia Hanyang, question mark. Yeah? You seem to have spoken too quickly just now and said something incredible. He liked her? He liked the ugly girl? He liked her very much? No, he just liked her and wanted to bully her. He wanted her to cry and hug his thigh so that she would see what it meant to offend him. He wanted her to see that he was alone and not accept other people's confessions. He wanted her not to live in that shabby house. He wanted her not to be hurt and not to be in so much pain. Wait, Xia Hanyang hugged his head in despair. Why did he feel more and more like he liked her? And he liked her very much. Otherwise, why would he take such a big risk to clean up her mess? Even for people of his status. If someone caught him, he would be in trouble. The old man kept nagging him that it was okay to have fun. However, if he really played with someone's life, the aftermath would be more troublesome. That was why he had gone overboard when it came to pranking people. In fact, no one had really died. It was just to scare people verbally. After all, he was lazy when he saw trouble. But the first time he saw her kneeling in a pool of blood, looking extremely desperate, what flashed through his mind was not the thought of trouble, but the need to erase all traces immediately. He wanted to take her out of that hell. The more Xia Hanyang thought about it, the gloomier his face became. He raised his head and glared at her. His eyes were burning with anger. He said irritably, so what if I like you? I like you. What do you think I should do? Wei Weibai was stunned by his roar and almost went deaf. Xia Hanyang suddenly reached out and grabbed her shoulder. He pressed her against his chest and held her firmly. It was a rough hug. He said, what are you worried about? I said that it's fine, so it's fine. Just focus on your studies, practice your formulas, and memorize that mess of college entrance exams of yours. Wildlife is very expensive, and it's very cool. You should be happy. Bai Weiwei's ears were tickled by the sound of his beating heart. It was the first time she had encountered such a silly and rough confession. // to facilitate your next reading, you can click Save. Chapter 1858. Was this a confession? This was simply a violent promotion. As if she dared to reject him, he would swing her up and smash her against the wall. In her mind, she imagined herself being smashed against the wall by Xia Hanyang. Do you like me or not? If you don't like me, I'll smash you until you like me. Fortunately, the stupid side task was frozen. Otherwise, based on her performance tonight, he would probably punish her. She was probably going to be penalized and punished to death. Suddenly, Xia Hanyang thought of something. He sniffed her neck like a dog. Wei Weibai was so sensitive that she wanted to leave. Xia Hanyang said seriously, why are you hiding? Let me see where you are hurt. Wei Weibai said, I'm not hurt. Xia Hanyang asked, where did that scumbag touch you? He felt that she was too embarrassed to say it. He was afraid that she was hurt, so he didn't dare to say it. Wei Weibai was silent for a moment before saying, he wanted to. Xia Hanyang interrupted rudely. That scumbag, I know what he did to you. You don't have to recall it. He didn't want her to come back to her senses. She had to recall that tragic experience. Bai Weiwei didn't speak again. She just opened her two misty eyes, which still had traces of tears. She finally said softly, well, he didn't succeed. I ran away quickly. He didn't have time to touch me. He just hit me. It's just some minor injuries. Xia Hanyang's face darkened. He wished he could cross over and stab that scumbag a few more times. He pursed his lips and said, I'm going to get the medical kit. Wait for me. Wei Weibai shook her head. I want to take a shower first. Hearing this, Xia Hanyang felt that she must be disgusted by that scumbag smell, so he immediately nodded. Then he took her to the bathroom and turned on the hot water for her. Then he put his shower gel and towel aside. because he didn't have time to buy girls' clothes. He took out his t-shirt and pants from his closet and gave them to Wei Wei Bai. Xiao Hanyang didn't think much of it when he did these things. Wei Wei Bai saw that these were all masculine things and didn't say anything. After all, her current state of mind should be anxious and uneasy, so she wouldn't pay attention to such trivial matters. He was too particular about the details. Xiao Hanyang would see through it. Although Xiao Hanyang was a fool in his studies, he was not really stupid. Sometimes, he dealt with things quickly and ruthlessly. His brain worked very fast. His reaction was more agile than others. And he also had the intuition of a wild beast. This kind of man was especially hard to deal with once he got serious. Xiao Hanyang watched her close the bathroom door. Then, he ran to get the first aid kit. Most of the items in the first aid kit were for external injuries, because he always fought hand-to-hand when he bullied others. He loved to beat people up. Not everyone could endure being beaten up by him. There were still people who resisted, and whenever they resisted, they would be happy. Therefore, when they fought, they would be injured many times. This made the old man very worried. Apart from the bodyguards, the chauffeur, and the nanny all knew martial arts. Even the medicine for external injuries was delivered at a fixed time. He thought of the scars on Wei Wei Bai's body when he noticed her body. Her fair skin was fragile and thin. The bruises on his body were very light, but on her body, they were very shocking. He took out the medicine for bruises and pain relief. Oh, right, the wound on the corner of her mouth. Damn it, scum, scum. Even whipping a corpse was not enough to vent his anger. How dare that scum hit her and hit her face? Fortunately, the wound was not big. Chapter 1859. But he was still angry. The doorbell rang. Xiao Hanyang put down the medicine and went to open the door. It was the food box sent by the driver. The food box was insulated and sealed. Xiao Hanyang took the food box and said, "You go back first. Tell the old man what happened later. Tell him that I caused it. If you dare to say anything else, I'll kill you." The chauffeur was completely under his control. He gave a death order, so the driver didn't dare to disobey him. Only by taking all the blame himself could Wei Wei Bai be fine, because someone would take care of these troubles for him. He had already dealt with the scene, and the follow-up trouble would be blamed on the old man. But the old man saw that he caused the trouble. He could only pinch his nose and accept it. After Xiao Hanyang finished speaking, he slammed the door and put the food box on the table. He heard the sound of the bathroom door opening, but he didn't want to look back. Instead, he saw Wei Wei Bai standing at the door of the bathroom. Her feet were white and shiny, and her slender and delicate feet were exposed from the rolled-up black trousers. His t-shirt was too big at the collar, and half of it slipped under her round and beautiful shoulders. Her long black hair fell over her shoulders, and her white skin was covered with black hair. Her youthful charm, in her budding age, aroused the man's nerves and heart. Xiao Hanyang still had one hand on the food box. The warm temperature began to drill into his bones from his palm. Then he felt that his whole body was hot, like the food in the food box. He couldn't wait to jump out immediately. Xiao Hanyang quickly lowered his head and suppressed his restless breathing. Damn, don't you think there are enough beasts? Did he also become a wolf? Xiao Hanyang suppressed his thoughts that didn't conform to the core values of society. Thinking of what Wei Wei Bai had experienced, he let his body cool down. Then he said with a straight face, "Apply the medicine first, then eat." Wei Wei Bai hesitated at the door of the bathroom. After thinking for a while, she slowly walked to the sofa. Then she sat down obediently. Xiao Hanyang's palms were sweating. He was carrying the medical kit, but he had already taken out the medicine and put it in the front compartment of the kit. He even pretended to rummage for a long time. It was as if he could hide his abnormality by doing so. He took out the ointment for the bruise. This thing is very useful. If you rub the bruise away today, I guarantee that you won't have any marks tomorrow. Wei Wei Bai was very obedient. She nodded and extended her wrist. There was an obvious bruise on his wrist. Wei Wei Bai said, "I'll do it myself." Xiao Hanyang pulled a long face and said, "Why did you do it yourself? You're not strong enough to open it. You might as well not waste my medicine." Wei Wei Bai was stunned, but she didn't say anything, but she still gave him her hand. Xiao Hanyang applied the ointment to her bruise. Her skin was cold and smooth, and it was very delicate. His fingers were very hot, like a flame touching water. His fingers trembled before he forcefully rubbed her bruise. Wei Weibai couldn't help gasping for breath. Xiao Hanyang's fingers paused, and his ears turned red. He quickly rubbed her bruise as if he was taking revenge. Then he said, "Well, where's the next wound?" Wei Weibai hesitated for a moment and said, "I'll rub it myself." Xiao Hanyang held the ointment tightly and said, "I'm more experienced than you." Wei Weibai looked at him hesitantly for a long time before she lowered her head awkwardly. Then she reached out and gently pulled down her collar. The bruise on her collarbone was exposed. Xiao Hanyang felt his throat begin to burn. He despised himself for being inhumane. Then he shook his hands and was about to rub her bruise. But when his fingers were about to touch it, he suddenly put the ointment into her hand. "Apply it yourself. Don't use too much strength. Just apply more." After that, he turned and ran to the bathroom. He complained as he ran, "What the hell is this weather? Why is it like a stove in this month? Go take a shower." She could hear the guilt in his voice when he complained. Wei Weibai looked at the ointment. This young man was really funny. He had no self-control at all. Wei Weibai applied the ointment on her collarbone and pressed it with her fingers. When Xiao Hanyang closed the door, he happened to see her lowering her head to apply the ointment. Something rushed out of his nostrils. He touched it. Nosebleed? Xiao Hanyang slammed the door. He covered his nose and leaned his head against the door. How disappointing. He snorted to himself. Why was he worse than a beast? Why didn't he comfort her at this time? Why did he have a nosebleed? Was he still human? After Xiao Hanyang despised himself, he realized that he really wasn't human, because his nosebleed couldn't stop. Chapter 1860. Xiao Hanyang didn't dare to walk out of the bathroom until he froze himself into a saint with cold water in the bathroom. Then he prepared food. After all, it was late at night. If Wei Weibai didn't eat something, she would starve to death. Wei Weibai looked a little dazed and well-behaved, probably because she was frightened. She ate the food obediently. Xiao Hanyang was afraid that she would not be able to digest the food because of the stress, so he stuffed 2 digestive pills in her mouth. Wei Weibai didn't give him a cold face. Instead, she looked at him with a peaceful expression. To be honest, what happened tonight was chaotic. But Wei Weibai was so well-behaved that Xiao Hanyang actually felt that she was very cute. He even felt that if she hadn't been frightened, he probably wouldn't have been able to see such a cute side of her. This kind of obedient feeling gave him an illusion that they were in a relationship. Wow, what illusion! They were in a relationship now. He just hadn't confessed. No, he seemed to have confessed. It seemed that he was at a disadvantage. Xiao Hanyang's face darkened, but he thought that Wei Weibai was so thin-skinned that she must be embarrassed. He knew that she must have a crush on him, but she was too embarrassed to say it. There was a guest room in his apartment, but it was unoccupied and was not lively at all. Xiao Hanyang was young and strong, so it was not a problem for him to live in the guest room. He gave the master bedroom to Wei Weibai. He was moved by himself. When did he start to care about other people? But seeing her thin body, he was afraid that she would get sick in the empty guest room. Wei Weibai didn't say too many words of gratitude. She just quietly listened to Xiao Hanyang. He asked her to sleep. She nodded and went to bed. Then she covered herself with the quilt and looked at him quietly. Xiao Hanyang sat by the bed shamelessly. The atmosphere was a little quiet. After a while of embarrassment, Xiao Hanyang felt his face twitch a little. He said, "Do you want some milk?" Wei Weibai shook her head and just looked at him quietly. Xiao Hanyang had seen a lot of big scenes. He had seen all kinds of scary eyes, but only her quiet gaze made his old face start to redden. He coughed twice before saying, "I can't sleep. Do you want to take some sleeping pills?" Wei Weibai shook her head. "I can sleep." Xiao Hanyang asked, "Really?" Wei Weibai, "Just memorize more formulas." Xiao Hanyang, this is beyond his knowledge, so I won't answer. Then he could only say, "Then you sleep first. I'll sleep in the next room." Wei Weibai pondered for a moment without saying anything. Xiao Hanyang was usually a thick-skinned person, but in the face of Wei Weibai's clear eyes, he couldn't help it. At the very least, he could only rub his nose helplessly. After all, he had to sit beside her all the time. She suspected that he was up to no good and refused to sleep. Wouldn't that be bad for his health? Even so, Xia Hanyang couldn't help but sit by the bed. Go to sleep. I won't leave until I see you fall asleep. Bai Weiwei frowned, but didn't say anything. She just gave a quiet hum. Such a quiet and well-behaved Weiwei Bai. She was so cute. He really didn't know what to do with her when she softened. He had a follower who especially liked pandas and thought that pandas were so cute. He didn't feel that way. However, when he saw Weiwei Bai, he suddenly understood the impulse to find a certain creature cute. He also felt that Weiwei Bai was very cute now. The more obedient she was, the cuter she was. /T. Chapter 1861. Weiwei Bai closed her eyes quietly. Slowly, her breathing became steady. She seemed to be asleep. Xia Hanyang sat by her bed for a long time before he patted his head. He kept staring at her. Was he a pervert? Xia Hanyang got up carefully. Forget it. He would go to sleep first. There were still some things to deal with tomorrow. As soon as he got up, a hand suddenly grabbed his clothes. Xia Hanyang stopped and slowly turned around. He saw Weiwei Bai open her eyes. They were bright and dark, like a pool of water in the dark, which looked unusually clean. She seemed to hesitate, frowning and pursing her lips. Finally, she said weakly, "Can you stay?" Xia Hanyang's brain seemed to be struck by lightning. Stay? All kinds of useless ideas appeared in his mind. A girl said this to a man. Wasn't this an invitation? But before the useless ideas in Xia Hanyang's mind took shape, Weiwei Bai said softly, "You sit by my bed. I'm not afraid of nightmares with you here." Xia Hanyang didn't know whether to be disappointed or glad. Fortunately, Weiwei Bai didn't mean that. But on second thought, she wanted him to accompany her when she had nightmares. This was a kind of trust. Xia Hanyang immediately sat on the chair beside the bed, looking serious. "Well, go to sleep. I'll protect you." Weiwei Bai, is it really okay to say such a line? She couldn't help but smile. Xia Hanyang saw that the corners of her mouth, which had been drooping, finally curved up. Her smile was very beautiful, like an epiphyllum blooming in the dark night, which made her pale face more stunning. Xia Hanyang was stunned for a moment. Then he heard his own heartbeat thumping against his chest. He held his breath for a long time before he said, "Go to sleep. You won't have nightmares." Weiwei Bai slowly closed her eyes. The night passed slowly. From late at night to early morning, the sun came into the window sill. It was like walking into the light from the darkness. It was a good hope. Xia Hanyang thought he couldn't stand it. After all, he hadn't slept all night and had been sitting in the chair all the time. It was not a physical problem. His body was very strong. At most, his waist would be a little sore after sitting for a night, but the rest was not a burden. It was because of his personality. He was the kind of person who couldn't sit still. This was also the reason why he was so frustrated when he went to school. After sitting quietly for a while, he couldn't help but chase after something new. But last night, he sat beside Weiwei Bai's bed. After staring at her face for an entire night, he didn't even think about picking up his phone. Instead, it was the sound of her breathing that made him feel that even the night was colorful. Her eyebrows, nose, lips, and when she breathed, the blanket shook slightly. Her fair skin and the fingers that occasionally poked out from under the blanket. They were all like the most exciting and fresh paintings. It drove away all of his frustrations from sitting still. He had watched over her all night and was extremely energetic. His fondness for her seemed to have improved as well. Weiwei Bai's eyelids were disturbed by the sunlight. She opened her eyes. Seeing Xia Hanyang sitting next to her, she didn't think much and smiled. "Morning." Xia Hanyang was stunned. Even the pain in his waist disappeared. He immediately responded, "Morning." Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 45. When Bai Weiwei heard the favorability prompt, her muddled brain reacted. She was in the middle of attacking a plane. // Chapter 1862. She had just dreamed that she was the queen of peerless elegance. She rode a dragon, spewed fire everywhere, and unified the universe. What a beautiful dream. This kind of dream made her feel very good. Weiwei Bai's smile disappeared, and then she said seriously, Thank you, Xia Hanyang. Xia Hanyang's face twitched. Damn you, Xia Hanyang. You're still a classmate at this point. Of course, thinking of Wei Wei Bai's current state, he didn't ask her to do anything. After all, her attitude softened and she smiled at him. She even relied on him. Xia Hanyang felt proud. He held back his smile and said, "Then I'll go first. Get up and have breakfast." After saying that, he walked out. When the door was closed, his face relaxed and the excitement in his eyes was suppressed. He still had business to do. Xia Hanyang called someone. Yesterday, when the accident happened, he ordered to investigate Wei Wei Bai's information. Then he called a nanny and asked her to come over to clean up and cook. Then he went to another bathroom to wash up. He was very fast. When he was done, Wei Wei Bai hadn't come out of the bathroom in the master bedroom. He turned on the computer and saw that the investigator had sent him the information. Xia Hanyang looked at the attachment and finally opened it. He was afraid that Wei Wei Bai would come out, so he scanned it hastily. When he saw the information, he felt as if he had passed by the slums when he went to find Wei Wei Bai last night. Her parents died, and she had a stepfather who was an alcoholic. She had nothing and could only rely on her own odd jobs to support herself. When she ate in the cafeteria, she relied on the cafeteria subsidies she got from her good grades. Those subsidies were very small. For Xia Hanyang, it was not enough for him to treat others to a meal. However, she was able to survive month after month with such a small amount of subsidies. Basically, it was steamed buns, pickles, and soup. She would buy the cheapest kind. Sometimes the cafeteria aunties couldn't stand it and would always give her more free food. Seeing this, Xia Hanyang's mind went blank for a while. He didn't even have any emotions, because his brain couldn't process this kind of information for a while. He couldn't even imagine what it was like. His life was too arrogant and gorgeous. There was no trace of darkness at all. Everyone doted on him, flattered him, and took care of him. He was used to this kind of life and couldn't imagine how Wei Wei Bai's life could be like this. Then he reacted. No wonder she was like a little bookworm. Every time he opened his mouth, he would talk about results, formulas, and learning. When all this information was thrown at Wei Wei Bai, it became unbearable. For the first time, Xia Hanyang felt a strong sense of empathy. She was at the end of her rope. She could only rely on her results. Even for ordinary people, grades were a shortcut to life's advancement. But for Wei Wei Bai, it was more than just a shortcut. Instead, it was a life-saving passage. It was her living expenses. It was the only basis for her survival. Xia Hanyang couldn't help but hold his temples. When he saw this, his temples kept throbbing. It was a headache. Yesterday's incident in the slums had already dealt him a critical blow. However, today's information made his heart sink. Being poor to this extent was already beyond young Master Xia's imagination. Even if she was an ordinary child from an ordinary family, she would still love him. No, she wouldn't be so miserable. Xia Hanyang saw a line of information. It was that she was looking for a tutoring job on Saturday. Even the phone number of the family she was going to contact was investigated. / to facilitate your next reading, you can click on the Chapter 1863. When Xia Hanyang saw this, he heard footsteps and immediately turned off the computer. He didn't want Wei Wei Bai to see that he was investigating her. Wei Wei Bai was still wearing Xia Hanyang's clothes from last night. The loose clothes and loose pants made her petite. Xia Hanyang's heart had already trembled because of her last night. Today, under the dazzling sunlight, he could clearly see the strong contrast between her black, white, and gray clothes and her thin, fragile, and fair appearance. It was no wonder that so many men like their women to wear their own clothes. In the past, when he heard this kind of gossip, he found it boring. A lackey even laughed and said that he would know when he had a girl he liked in the future. Xia Hanyang sneered. A bunch of idiots. He was a man who had broken away from vulgar interests. How could he be the same as these gossipy men? However, when he saw Wei Wei Bai, he suddenly felt that he was not only worse than a beast, but also particularly vulgar. This kind of appearance was full of his own traces and aura. He didn't just like it. He liked it to death. Xia Hanyang suppressed his impulse to pounce on her and said pretentiously, "The nanny is here. You can go to school when you want to later. Don't suddenly change the pace." He asked her to pretend that she didn't know anything and go to class. This way, she would be cleared of suspicion to the greatest extent, and that scumbag would definitely disappear for a while and no one would find out. Because this guy had been on the run, Wei Wei Bai also thought of this, and her expression became a little ugly. Xia Hanyang was afraid that she would think too much and make a fuss about snatching the phone away from him again. He immediately grabbed her hand. Wei Wei Bai's fingers trembled, but Xia Hanyang pretended not to notice. He dragged her to the sofa. The nanny had already gone to the kitchen to make breakfast. However, Xia Hanyang dragged out a pile of textbooks. I suddenly remembered that the exam is coming, but I haven't reviewed my homework. Wei Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief and quickly picked up the books. I'll teach you. The books were flipped open as if they had just been made. There wasn't even a signature. Didn't these books just come out of the factory? Wei Wei Bai could only turn to the pages that she was studying and then said to him, "What exercise book did you do?" Xia Hanyang, "What exercise book?" Wei Wei Bai, "Your recent study progress." Xia Hanyang thought for a moment. 9 by 9 multiplication tables. Wei Wei Bai, under her incredulous gaze, Xia Hanyang curled his lips and said, "I'm just kidding. I'm also a serious learner. I can understand any formula you casually mention." What the hell? If he understood, wouldn't the old man be so happy that he would die? It was to let the old man live for a few more years. He decided not to study. Bai Wei Wei expressed, "You look so calm when you're lying." She pretended not to hear his fake politeness and began to talk about the key points in the textbook. It was the sound of flowing water. And those annoying xia xia. Xia Hanyang suddenly became a little infatuated. Oh, the ugly girl is actually very cute as a tutor. He couldn't understand what she was saying, but suddenly he wasn't annoyed. He wanted her to keep talking. It would be best if she could sit by his side all the time. She would wear a wedding dress, give birth to a child, and die with him when she grew old. Wei Wei Bai suddenly asked, "Do you understand?" Xia Hanyang suddenly woke up and quickly reached out to touch his lips. He was afraid that she would see through his drooling. He immediately said calmly, "Yes, I understand." Why did he suddenly fantasize about such a long time ago? He disliked her a little. Had he never seen a woman in his life? He even thought about having a few children. Wei Wei Bai continued her lecture. Under the warm sun and the fragrance of breakfast made by the nanny, the atmosphere was surprisingly quiet and beautiful. She sorted out the key points in the textbook and reviewed them in a calm tone. As she spoke, she found that something was wrong. Then she looked up and saw Xia Hanyang slumped on the sofa, asleep. To facilitate the next reading, you can click on Chapter 1864. Wei Wei Bai was speechless. Then she silently closed the book that looked like it had just come out of the factory. A bad student was indeed a bad student for 10,000 years. Wei Wei Bai said that she would continue to do questions to earn points to save the dangerous side mission. She would wait for the system to come back. Wei Wei Bai went to class calmly. Her heart was as still as water, and so was her face. But Xia Hanyang thought that she must still be traumatized, and he was even more afraid that she would take things too far and commit suicide by calling someone. So he followed a few attendants all the way, and with arrogant footsteps, he followed by Wei Wei. Wei Wei Bai went to class. Xia Hanyang also went to class to sleep. Wei Wei Bai went to the restroom. Xia Hanyang and a few men guarded the restroom door. The girls were so scared that they thought that Xia Hanyang was going to do something to them. Wei Wei Bai maintained her character and went to the library to borrow books. Xia Hanyang also borrowed books, Pinocchio, Grimm's fairy tales, and so on. When it was time to eat, Xia Hanyang waved his hand. "The whole cafeteria is free today. I'm taking care of everything." Wei Wei Bai almost spat out the soup in Xia Hanyang's mouth. Don't say such lowly lines. She was ashamed to be with him. Xia Hanyang didn't think it was high-profile enough. "I'll go home and tell the old man to sponsor the cafeteria so that you can eat for free from now on." After that, he didn't look at the happy students. Instead, he stared at Wei Wei Bai. His eyes were shining like a wolf's. He almost stuck out his tongue. He couldn't wait for Wei Wei Bai to praise him. Wei Wei Bai thought that although it was lowly, it was affordable. After all, they could eat free meals in the future. She couldn't help but smile. Xia Hanyang was immediately happy. Although she didn't like bags and clothes, she liked books and the food in the cafeteria. What was so difficult about this? He had a lot of money and could do it. Looking at Wei Wei Bai's smile, he actually rested his chin on his hands in satisfaction. It felt so good. He also had his first love. It was sweet. Xia Hanyang was soaked in a kind of sweet water called Wei Wei Bai. He had never felt this way before. Even Xia Hanyang could understand those who became as sentimental as Mrs. Xianglin once they fell in love. Right now, he wished he could grab someone and tell them, "Look, isn't my Wei Wei cute? Look at how seriously my Wei Wei is reading. Look, my Wei Wei eats a lot and is very healthy. Look, my Wei Wei likes me like this." We're practically a match made in heaven. Because it was too funny. Her favorable impression of him was now at 50. Wei Wei Bai looked at Xia Hanyang, who was immersed in his fantasy and couldn't help smiling. Then, she heard the inexplicable increase in favorability. Xia Hanyang had such a weird IQ. She really had no interest in strategy. It felt like being in the same company as this guy made one want to take a mask to cover their faces. However, Wei Wei Bai felt relieved, because the goal of Xia Hanyang's strategy was different from that of other planes. Therefore, she didn't have to do anything when his favorability increased quickly. However, she wasn't worried that she would screw up or that something tragic would happen in the later stages of the game. Because this guy was so stupid, he probably wouldn't be able to make any waves later. Wei Wei Bai was relieved. During the afternoon class, Xia Hanyang still slept soundly. But when the class ended, he looked up very punctually and yawned. "What is this? It's so boring." Wei Wei Bai didn't want to talk to the underachiever. This was the dignity of a top student. Then, Xia Hanyang jumped up like a tiger out of the mountain. Slash. Chapter 1865. He immediately reached out to help Wei Wei Bai pack up her things. "Well, the boring class is over. Let's go and play." Wei Wei Bai didn't nod. Instead, she wanted to take her school bag away. "No, I'll go first. I've troubled you too much, bang." Xia Hanyang hammered the table with his hand, and the table almost cracked. Several followers had already run to the door and were about to call Xia Hanyang. However, when they saw this scene, they silently shrank back. Men in love were not to be trifled with. The students in the classroom also dispersed in an uproar. After all, Xia Hanyang's name could scare people to death. For a moment, the classroom was particularly deserted. The atmosphere was gloomy. Xia Hanyang's temper flared up. Without thinking much, he said, "Wei Wei Bai, are you trying to distance yourself from me? Don't you know what kind of relationship we have now? I'm the only person you can rely on now. How dare you talk about distance with me?" He spoke in a sarcastic tone. It was particularly scary. Xia Hanyang was also anxious. Where does she go now? Except for him, she had no one she could rely on. As soon as she was polite to him, he was not right. He felt stuffy in his heart and couldn't stand a kind of depression. In the end, Xia Hanyang felt wronged at his heart. "Where else do you want to go? Back to that room?" Speaking of that room, Wei Wei Bai's face turned pale. Xia Hanyang suddenly woke up. Seeing her pale face, he wished he could slap himself several times. He immediately reached out to hold Wei Wei Bai. "Wei Wei, I didn't mean to." He shouldn't have mentioned that. He had already made her feel better, but he still used these things to poke her heart. And this kind of thing couldn't be revealed. Once there was a trace, it would be a disaster for Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai looked at this fool and had nothing to say. She wanted to pick up her school bag, but Xia Hanyang grabbed the strap with one hand. He snatched the bag into his arms and suddenly thought of something. His eyes lit up as he said, "I've recently fallen in love with studying. Why don't you tutor me?" He had only just figured it out. It was a simple matter for him to take Wei Wei Bai home. After all, he felt that they were already a couple. So what if they were living together? But Wei Wei Bai was different from the people in his circle. She might be very conservative. She felt that it was inappropriate to go home with him. Xia Hanyang had never been a considerate person. His considerate brain cells had been dedicated to Wei Wei Bai. At this moment, he thought of Wei Wei Bai's difficulties. The information in the morning had given him a huge shock. If the suffering had happened elsewhere, he would not have felt it. But the suffering happened to those around him, and even the people he cared about. All of a sudden, His immature thoughts were crushed. They couldn't even bear to part with her and wanted to kill her. Because she had a hard life. Wasn't she going to be a tutor? She might as well do it for him. If he gave her money so openly, she would accept it without any psychological burden. Wei Wei Bai asked tutor. Xia Hanyang immediately held her hand. He felt that her hand was thin and tender, so he didn't dare to use too much strength. Yes, isn't the college entrance examination coming up? I definitely want to get good grades, so I need a tutor to help me review. Wei Wei Bai felt that being Xia Hanyang's tutor seemed to be a good idea. After all, Xia Hanyang was so rich. He definitely wouldn't be stingy with a few hundred yuan per lesson. Some parents would find it expensive. After all, she was only a senior in high school. Moreover, senior high school students were seriously preparing for the college entrance examination. Most parents wouldn't consider it. She asked casually, "It's good that you have the determination to take the exam. If you plan to get good grades, you can hire a tutor." Xia Hanyang immediately said confidently, "Yes, if you tutor me, I will definitely be able to get into the Tsinghua Cup." Wei Wei Bai was speechless. She suddenly didn't dare to be his tutor. To hell with the Tsinghua Cup. Xia Hanyang was the top student in the school. Even the Blue Line New Oriental School didn't necessarily want him. //T. Chapter 1866. The side mission was not activated, but Wei Wei Bai thought that if Xia Hanyang's grades were improved, when the system came back from the meeting, the side mission would be removed from the frozen state. The scores would be recalculated. Xia Hanyang would definitely not be so bad as to only have a negative score. So Wei Wei Bai thought that tutoring could be done. More importantly, she would have living expenses. She guessed that her period was coming, and now her pocket was so empty that she didn't even have money for a sanitary napkin. She really couldn't live anymore. Wei Wei Bai was taken home by Xia Hanyang to be his tutor. She tried to say, "Then let's make it 80 yuan for each class." She wanted to say 50, but she thought that Xia Hanyang was too difficult to teach. More importantly, her empty pockets made her try to raise the price. And Xia Hanyang seemed to want to tutor a lot of classes. Plus, if she lived in his house, she could tutor a few classes in a night. In this way, the living expenses were reasonable. However, Xia Hanyang looked blank. 80 what? Wei Wei Bai's heart skipped a beat. Did this guy want to tutor? How about 50 yuan? Xia Hanyang finally reacted. He was still holding the dessert fruit in his hand, which was for Wei Wei Bai. He never ate this crap, but to let her eat without any psychological burden. He made 2 servings and ate them together. Strawberry pudding. It was sweet and red, just like her, attractive and cute. Although he had regained his senses, it took him a great deal of effort to understand the number of 50. You mean 50 yuan? Wei Wei Bai. Yes. Although Xia Hanyang provided food and accommodation, the daily necessities that girls needed were more troublesome than boys. She couldn't let Xia Hanyang pack these things for her. This world was very leisurely and peaceful. After dealing with Xia Hanyang, Wei Wei Bai felt that it was really similar to a vacation. As long as the living expenses were settled, she basically had no worries. Except for the academic genius index. Xia Hanyang was expressionless. He stuffed the pudding into Wei Wei Bai's hand and then put his share on the table. After making sure that he wouldn't crush the strawberry pudding, he finally roared, "Are you looking down on me? 50. I'm only worth 50 yuan. Am I worthless in your eyes?" Wei Wei Bai's hair was about to fly from his roar. She held the dessert firmly and immediately raised the price. How about 100? For a high school student, it was indeed not bad to give someone 100 extra lessons. However, Xia Hanyang was not satisfied. "My value is so high. Are you trying to annoy me by charging such a popular price of 100 yuan? Wei Wei Bai. How about 200? Xia Hanyang 10,000. In fact, he didn't realize at first that it was $85 because he was wondering if it was 800,000 or 500,000. Then, he calculated the amount of pocket money in his account. He realized that he could afford it even if it was 1,000,000 yuan. But by the time he reacted, he realized that it was 85. The psychological gap was too big. When had he ever used something so cheap? Even tutoring couldn't be so cheap. Didn't this ugly girl know how expensive he was? The husky by the old master's side hired an expert dog trainer to teach him every day. The lessons in a day were already 8,000 yuan. He was worse than a dog. Wei Wei Bai maintained her persona. 10,000 is too much. Xia Hanyang, how is it too much? It's just 1 or 2,000 more than a dog. I don't want to lose face anymore. Chapter 1867. Bai Weiwei looked at the rich Uncle Xia Hanyang with a silly face. She was finally sure that Xia Hanyang really had a problem with his brain. It was not a pretense. She opened the book silently and suddenly realized that she would get nothing from teaching this guy. After all, he was a student with a problem in IQ. The teacher couldn't help him get good grades, even if she worked herself to death. Under Xia Hanyang's urging, Wei Wei Bai began to tutor him while eating strawberry pudding. She tried to teach him something simple. Xia Hanyang was in high spirits. He cooperated with her teaching. No matter what numbers she recited or formulas she wrote down from memory, he did as she said. He had a good short-term memory. If he really wanted to learn, he could repeat what Wei Wei Bai said. But he would forget it soon, and he never paid attention. He just wanted to take advantage of the tutoring. He asked Wei Wei Bai to be with him, and he found that she was very relaxed when she was teaching. He touched her fingertips with his fingers, but she didn't respond. He deliberately hooked her trousers with his feet, but she didn't avoid it. Instead, she taught him seriously, and she was easy to coax. He asked the nanny to make soup, and she drank the soup while she was teaching. It seemed that she didn't pay attention to the food, so he was happy. Wei Wei Bai's malnourished body was too thin and weak. All he could think about was to let her eat more nutritious food. The tutoring class was very cheerful. The nanny was shocked to see Xia Hanyang listening to the class. Wei Wei Bai stopped teaching after 10 o'clock. She looked up and said to him, "High school students should be careful not to stay up late, so go to bed early." Xia Hanyang's face fell when he saw that she didn't want to teach. He reached out and hooked her sleeve, asking willfully, "Teach more. Today I know how much knowledge I lack. I realize how much I love knowledge and how much I want to go to college. Your voice is my salvation, and your class is my sunshine." Wei Wei Bai felt that the soup she just drank was about to roll out of her stomach. She immediately smacked the book in his face. "I'm teaching you to review high school knowledge, but you have to write it yourself. Did you solve the few questions I asked you to solve just now?" Xia Hanyang's face stiffened. Seeing that Wei Wei Bai was going to take the notes in front of him, he immediately held up the notes and said, "It's been solved. Don't you believe me? I'm such a smart person, and with your excellent teaching methods, I've learned it all." After saying that, he immediately yawned and stretched. "Okay, let's go to sleep." Wei Wei Bai nodded calmly. Yes, she had earned 30,000 yuan. This was the tuition fee that Xia Hanyang desperately gave her. But she didn't really want it. After all, with her noble and cold persona, how could she be so greedy? Therefore, Xia Hanyang was the one who forced it on her. She had no choice. As soon as Wei Wei Bai got up, Xia Hanyang thought of something and ran to the sofa to take out a big box. There was also a brand logo on the box. "These are all ready-made clothes. I estimated your size and bought them. After all, if you want to order them privately, you have to order them half a month in advance. Don't always wear the school uniform." Although she looked very cute in the school uniform. But when he thought that she had no clothes to wear and could only wear the school uniform, he felt sad. His heart seemed to be pickled, sour, and astringent. Wei Wei Bai was stuffed with a big box, but she didn't refuse. "Then I'll pay you." Xia Hanyang's face darkened, and he took a few steps forward. Download the at https://m. Sashu. Com. Chapter 1868. Wei Wei Bai couldn't help but step back. He was like a ferocious beast. When he exploded, he was especially powerful. He gave people a strong and evil feeling. He forced her against the wall and pushed her into his arms. There was a big box between them. "Pay? I'm raising my woman, and I still need you to pay. Do you want to raise me into a scumbag?" Only a scumbag would let his woman starve and freeze. He had to pay for his own hard life. Xia Hanyang was a male chauvinist. He was domineering and possessive, but he didn't lack protection. If he wanted to protect a person, he would use all means. Wei Wei Bai's lips trembled. She felt that if the system came back, the side task would be activated. She would probably fall out with Xia Hanyang. Xia Hanyang was a brainless man, but his physical strength was particularly strong. When the time came, she might be hung up and beaten by him. She could only try to pull the corners of her mouth. Forget it, I'd better increase his favorability. If she fell out with him in the future, at least his favorability could save her life. So Wei Wei Bai's expression softened. I didn't mean that. This was the first time Xia Hanyang saw Wei Wei Bai smile at him so frankly and gently. That smile was more dazzling than the crystal lamp above his head, making him a little dizzy for a moment. Wei Wei Bai looked up, and her eyes moved slightly. There seemed to be countless inexplicable gentleness, but it also contained countless beautiful longing. She said, I'm just very grateful to you, Xia Hanyang. Xia Hanyang's scalp immediately exploded. This soft voice, this soft and grateful tone. He stared blankly for a while before he loosened his hand and said, What's there to be grateful for? I'll lean on you in the future. This was his first love. This was the first time he was moved. This was the first time he had an explosive desire to protect a girl. He was even a little overwhelmed. Sometimes he wondered if he had done something wrong. He had done so many things for her. Was it really worth it? But this smile of hers, this gratefulness, all of a sudden, his slightly uneasy heart was filled. It was worth it, too damn worth it. Xia Hanyang released his hand and said happily, Well, go to sleep. Don't worry. I won't attack you in the middle of the night. Suppressing his restless little heart like this, he used to get whatever he wanted immediately. How could he suppress himself like this? However, he didn't feel uncomfortable or irritable at all. The old man always said that he was like a mud monkey running around everywhere and not knowing his place at all. Moreover, when he was capricious, he was like a volcano erupting. Everyone would suffer. This was the first time he felt that his restlessness had disappeared. It was as if he was in the same room as her. She was smiling at him quietly. Then everything would be fine, even if he couldn't kiss, hug, or be shy with her for the time being. However, he was no longer in a hurry. Young Master Xia generously watched as Wei Wei Bai walked in and closed the door behind her. He finally jumped up and clenched his fists and shouted happily. Wei Wei was starting to like him too. He wasn't really stupid. Wei Wei Bai's attitude towards him was very clear. She looked at him as if he was a bully. She used to hate him to death. Now that her attitude was so soft, it must be because he saved the beauty and protected her. Chasing a girl to this point, the sense of self-confidence and achievement was bursting. It was much better than the various brainless games at the amusement park. Ding, the male lead's favorability is at 55. Chapter 1869. The nanny washed her hands. As soon as she walked out, she saw Xia Hanyang wandering around like a blind fly. He jumped up and down, laughing silently like a rabbit. Then, he hit the sofa cushion with all his might. It was like a scary silent drama. The nanny was actually used to it. That's right. The young master was indeed that silly. No, that childish. Xia Hanyang noticed that the nanny was here and immediately stopped. His expression turned cold. Then he said in a low voice, Tell old master that she is my little lover. Little lover was an insulting title in the circle. It was the kind of woman who had no status around those young masters and could only be played with. Of course, he didn't treat Wei Wei Bai as his little lover. He was afraid that old master would secretly make things difficult for him. Her identity as his little lover was the most protected identity on old master's side. When he became stronger in the future, he could openly go against old master. Then he would be able to hold her hand and swagger home. It wasn't impossible now. However, Xia Hanyang's mind turned. He knew that if he was maliciously instigated by old master now, he might not be able to protect Wei Wei by 100%. He didn't want her to be tortured, no matter how small the possibility was. Hadn't she been tortured enough? The nanny nodded. She also believed in the identity of his little lover, even if the little master was particularly happy and excited. But this was only temporary. He would always have a 3-minute enthusiasm. In a few days, he might change to another woman and still be so childish and happy. After the nanny walked out, She called Old Master. Nanny, yes, everything is fine. He even ate 2 more bowls of rice today and drank an extra bowl of soup. Old Master, it's good that that brat ate more. Pay attention to what ingredients he likes recently and make more. Nanny, yes, by the way, he's living with a little lover. Old Master, it's good that he misses a woman. He's a grown man. It was scary that he didn't have a woman before. There was a lot of chaos in the circle. It was much more normal to like women than not to like women. The old man said, by the way, did he go to the amusement park again after dinner? He doesn't know how to focus on his studies. How can I trust him with the family business in the future? The nanny said, no, he's studying. The old man said, learning how to prank people? He just doesn't do his job. He doesn't behave like a student. The nanny said, no, he's reviewing his high school lessons. The old man said, huh? What? The nanny said, that little lover likes to study, so he followed suit. The old man said, Mom, the heavens have eyes. It's time for the Xia family's ancestral graves to smoke. That little lover is good. It's best if she can influence his studies. Buy more clothes and bags for that girl. When that boy gets sick of her, remember to give that girl a villa as a reward. The nanny said, yes, master. The old man said, let's not talk about it anymore. My grandson is enlightened. I'm going to pay my respects to my ancestors. The nanny replied, yes, master. After the nanny left, Xia Hanyang received a call from his disreputable friends. Old Xia, come and drink. There's a dancer who can dance with a cobra. She's so beautiful. Xia Hanyang said, get lost. I'm studying. Don't disturb me. After that, he threw away his phone. He was now a little prince who loved to study. These lousy friends of his were all good-for-nothings. None of them were good. Sure enough, his Weiwei was cute, had good grades, and a noble character. The more he thought about it, the more Xia Hanyang couldn't help but run to the door. He only took a glance and then left. It was even more difficult than giving up drugs. Weiwei Bai was his drug. Xia Hanyang turned around and found that the door wasn't locked. He stuck his head in to take a look, only to see Weiwei Bai standing at the door expressionlessly. She was holding the clothes he bought and seemed to be going to take a shower. Xia Hanyang smiled awkwardly when he was caught. Weiwei Bai looked him up and down and said, get up early tomorrow. It's better to study in the morning. By the way, I'll check the problem I just asked you to solve tomorrow. After that, she slammed the door shut and shut Xia Hanyang out. Xia Hanyang was speechless. Wait, he didn't answer any of those questions. They were all doodles. He immediately rushed to the computer, turned it on, and went to some learning forums. Please answer these questions in detail. I'll give you 5,000 yuan for each question you solve. After all, Weiwei Bai only gave him 10,000 yuan. Others would give him 5,000 yuan. / button. Chapter 1870. Xia Hanyang's learning attitude was very good. Weiwei Bai was very satisfied. Every time she set up a problem, he could do it. She felt that when the system came back, Xia Hanyang's recalculated score would be at least 60, if not 80. After all, the process of reviewing the basic knowledge of grade 12 was perfectly expressed by his answers. Even she, who had the secret book of learning, felt that he was a genius to solve some questions. She looked at Xia Hanyang with a gentle gaze like that of a loving mother. He was really promising. She estimated that when the side task was unfrozen, this guy's score would rise. Maybe the side quest wouldn't make things difficult for them anymore. After all, the rule was that a top student was not allowed to fall in love with a bad student. What if he was not a bad student? He would probably be able to fall in love. Then this world would be more relaxing than a vacation. Bai Weiwei looked at the silly Xia Hanyang and felt that he was pleasing to the eye. And this guy had such a low IQ. It was normal for his favorability to rise so easily. She didn't have to worry. Every time Xia Hanyang handed in his homework, the way Weiwei Bai looked at him made him so excited that he got goosebumps. This new feeling. The flattery of others had also become dull and dull. But he couldn't resist Weiwei Bai's encouraging look. He was now carrying a school bag with brand new, but deliberately scribbled and folded books in it. He went to school with Weiwei Bai. In the past, when he was forced to go to school, he only wanted to carry a bag of explosives to blow up the school. Now he followed Wei Wei by to school with 2 school bags, and he felt excited. As for why there were 2 school bags, after all, how could a man let his woman carry a school bag? Of course, he had to help. So under the fearful eyes of the whole class, Xia Hanyang came back to class again. He came to class every day. He didn't want them to live. If Xia Hanyang hadn't been well-behaved these days, these students and teachers would have cried to the principal's office. But with Xia Hanyang in the class, it was like suppressing evil. Whether it was students or teachers, they all lived in fear and trepidation. How could Xia Hanyang not understand those dog-like things? Every day, they put on a sad face behind him. So what if he was here to learn? This school was built for him. This group of turtle doves occupying a magpie's nest actually panicked when he came to class. It made him look like a little tyrant who bullied men and women. Wei Wei Bai suddenly knocked his forehead with a pen. What are you thinking about? Reviewing. She took out the book. Use a pen to draw a function diagram in the handwriting. Xia Hanyang covered his forehead with his hand. He was not unhappy at all. He just nagged, "You don't rest after class. You only have books in your eyes." Wei Wei Bai flipped through her book. It's important for students to study. Xia Hanyang sneered. Who said this is serious? There are so many serious things. Wei Wei Bai, for example. Xia Hanyang saw her raise her eyes. Although her eyes were hazy under her eyelashes, every time she focused on him, there was always a clear spring flowing in her eyes. She was so beautiful that he couldn't help himself. Xia Hanyang pressed his hand down and said with an embarrassed smile, "You'd better study seriously." His mind was full of improper thoughts. In the past, when she didn't like him, he was so overbearing that he almost used force. He was definitely annoying. Now that her attitude had softened, he started to act like a coward. He didn't dare to go too far with her. He was worried that she would be angry. Chapter 1871. You can search Time Travel System. Prince Charming, come to Shushu. Come on Baidu to find the S. He was also worried that she would not treat him so gently. Even he felt strange about Xia Hanyang's vegetarianism. Unexpectedly, he could be so serious one day. Wei Wei Bai felt that there was something wrong with Xia Hanyang's eyes. They were so hot that they almost burned his head. It made her feel that this guy was up to no good. It was another very normal and harmonious day. Wei Wei Bai packed her school bag. Xia Hanyang carried 2 school bags obediently. Then they walked out of the school gate. The driver had been waiting for a long time, and the followers had also been waiting for a long time. Xia Hanyang's face immediately darkened when he saw those followers. But one of the followers kept winking at him. Xia Hanyang raised his eyebrows and glanced at Wei Wei Bai hesitantly. But she didn't find anything and directly got into the car. Xia Hanyang also threw his school bag to the front passenger seat and then walked to the group of followers. Cut the crap. What's the trouble? He was very busy now. The followers also knew that he was busy with love. One of them took out a few love letters and whispered, "They are all for little sister-in-law." Was she his little lover or not? They were not blind. If Xia Hanyang regarded Wei Wei Bai as his little lover, he would not be so serious now. They called her little sister-in-law to show respect. They also knew that Wei Wei Bai meant a lot to Xia Hanyang. Xia Hanyang was relieved, but then his face darkened again when he realized what had happened. He glanced at the car and then secretly gestured to his followers. He clenched his fists as if he wanted to smash someone's head. The followers immediately understood and then put away the love letters. One of them said, "Brother Xia, the amusement park has made a lot of profit recently. Do you want to hold a celebration party?" It was a celebration party held by this group of people. There'd be all kinds of nonsense. In the past, Xia Hanyang would be happy to join in the fun. But now, he was busy studying and had no time to care about these trivial things. If you want to hold one, you can do it yourselves. That kind of party is boring. Don't call me in the future. After that, Xia Hanyang raised his head and glared at them. He felt like he was looking at a bunch of dregs that had rotted into the mud. Followers, you used to be the happiest. Seeing that everything was fine, Xia Hanyang immediately turned around, ran to the car, and opened the door. The footman heard Xiao Hanyang say with a smile, "Those guys have nothing to do with me. If it weren't for the fact that they are related to my family, I wouldn't have interacted with them. They're a group of playboys who only know how to eat, drink, and play. My reputation is ruined because of them." Wei Wei Bai blinked her eyes. Her eyelashes were curved, and her black hair was incomparably soft. Hearing Xiao Hanyang's words, she only had one feeling. If a person wanted to be thick-skinned, they could exceed the latitude and longitude of the earth. The lackeys watched as the car drove away. After a moment of silence, they couldn't help but ask, "Is this how all relationships are like?" Ever since Xiao Hanyang fell in love, he didn't even want his face anymore. This dirty water was directly poured onto them. He did not even think about how he behaved like a bully when he was wooing Lin Mingya. This wasn't instigated by them, right? When the footmen sighed, "What should we do in the future? If we fall out of love, we will probably be very miserable." Now that he was in love, his feelings were as deep as the sea. If he fell out of love in the future, they would be his punching bag. If Brother Xiao really likes her, it is unlikely that he will let her go. Chapter 1872. It's not easy to get married. Let's talk about it later. Let's have a celebration. Soon, they put the topic behind them, but they knew very well that Xiao Hanyang and Wei Wei Bai couldn't be together forever. However, Xiao Hanyang was in high spirits now, so no one dared to discourage him. After returning home, it was time for dessert after dinner. Xiao Hanyang seized this time to give Wei Wei Bai some nutrition. Besides various fruits and desserts, the soup during lectures was very nourishing. He would do whatever was good for the body. He had never been so serious about himself. Wei Wei Bai continued to review the curriculum of the second year of high school. In the first year of high school, Xiao Hanyang vowed that he had mastered it. Wei Wei Bai was very gratified. It seemed that Xiao Hanyang's brain was not completely rotten. He still had some learning ability. In fact, she didn't know. Xiao Hanyang used a computer every day to spend money on the learning forum. He was now the biggest money bag on the forum. Many people relied on his questions to make a living. The number of people on the forum soared. They were all waiting for the benefits of 5,000 yuan per question. The forum owner looked at the skyrocketing traffic and laughed so hard that his teeth fell. Xiao Hanyang pretended to solve the questions seriously, but in fact, he cheated with his on his lap. Wei Wei Bai didn't pay much attention to it. She drank the soup carefully. It seemed to be bird's nest soup. She ate whatever Xiao Hanyang gave her. After all, her body was too weak. It was probably caused by hunger. If she sat for too long, her eyes would turn black. This was the result of malnutrition. When she sipped the soup, her lips gently pursed the white porcelain bowl. Seeing the soup, she couldn't help but shout to the nanny in the kitchen, "Make me a cooling soup to cool down." The nanny immediately said, "Yes, young master." After the nanny finished cooking and desserts, she began to stew the soup. All kinds of soup were ready. She also knew how to make the soup that Xiao Hanyang mentioned, and this kind of soup didn't take much time. Xiao Hanyang reached out and pulled his collar. Meanwhile, Wei Wei Bai had already finished her soup. She picked up a tissue and wiped her mouth. "Have you finished writing? Let me see the answer." Xiao Hanyang was shocked, and his anger was replaced by coldness. He hadn't finished copying them yet. It was too risky to cheat. He had no choice but to hand over the answer. Wei Wei Bai saw that the last question was not done well, but she did not say anything. After all, Xiao Hanyang's learning attitude and ability were beyond imagination. She opened the book, took out the formula of the question, and began to repeat the question to Xiao Hanyang. Xiao Hanyang carefully slid the phone from his thigh to his calf, then to his ankle, and gently slid it to the floor. Then he kicked the phone under the sofa. The evidence was destroyed. On the surface, he listened to the lecture calmly. Suddenly, everything went black. The electricity was cut off. Download the at https://m/sashu.com. Chapter 1873. Don't be afraid. It's just a power switch. The nanny immediately came out and took out a flashlight. "I'll go and take a look." After the nanny went out, there was a silent sense of oppression in the dark. Wei Wei Bai didn't feel anything. She supported her chin with one hand and wondered when the system would come back from the meeting. She didn't hear the sound of it eating snacks beside her ear. She always felt that something was missing. The system had developed from a sharp-tongued little prince to a snack bucket today. It wasn't easy. Suddenly, she felt that his fingers were hotter. Then, Xia Hanyang's breathing became heavier. Wei Weibai narrowed her eyes strangely, and Xia Hanyang had already sneaked over to by Wei Wei's side. He didn't dare to make a sound. During this time, he had put away his willful and reckless side and was too well behaved. But he had been suppressed for a long time, and something was wrong. Suddenly, Wei Weibai heard his soft breathing close to her ear. Wei Weibai wanted to avoid it, but the next second, his hand clasped her shoulder, and then his head was leaning on her shoulder. His hands were loosely wrapped around her waist. This was a posture of incomparable dependence. His voice was low and magnetic with immature sex appeal. Wei Wei, you haven't said that you like me yet. His breath was a little flirtatious, with a hook of warmth. It was like a routine to lure the prey into a trap. But more than that, he really wanted to hear her heart. In the dark, his hands were sweating nervously. How could such a thing as innocence appear on him? And it wasn't an act, it was really pure. He felt that he had lived arrogantly for years in vain. Why did he suddenly act like a little idiot who hadn't seen the world? He didn't dare to move. Even holding hands would cause him to feel so conflicted. He wasn't a girl. Wei Weibai was very quiet. She seemed to be stunned, so she didn't react for a while. But in fact, she was thinking that the system hadn't come back yet. She didn't know how high his score was. But these days, after her devilish tutoring, his ability to answer questions had improved. Those formulas to solve the problems were familiar and experienced. The index was probably not low. Therefore, if he said that he liked her, he shouldn't be punished by the law, because Xia Hanyang already loved learning and was very good at it. That was why top students fell in love with top students. This was perfectly justified. Wei Weibai nodded to herself and said calmly, I like it. If she said she liked it, her favorability would definitely increase. She wasn't stupid enough to reject him. Xia Hanyang, his mind was like a field of snow, a vast expanse of whiteness. It was as if he had been struck by lightning, and all he could hear was like. What did she like? Do you like him? When he came back to his senses, he suddenly exerted force in his hand, trembling as he tried to search for her face. Bai Weiwei was fiercely strangled by him and almost didn't breathe. He was extremely excited. Wei Wei, say that again. Wei Weibai was out of breath. She coughed and said, let go of me first. Xia Hanyang, however, was insatiable. His heart was beating like a drum, and his face was flushed. He said helplessly, what do you like about me the most? Wei Weibai, what do you like about you? I like how you love learning the most. Xia Hanyang, it was like pouring ice water on his head. When he was studying, he would spend money to cheat. Suddenly, he remembered the phone under the sofa. He had to delete the browsing traces later, clear the cache, and destroy the evidence. He couldn't let Wei Weibai see that he didn't like to study. This kind of small matter couldn't stop Xia Hanyang's enthusiasm. It wasn't easy for them to be in love, so he didn't have to bear with it anymore. Xia Hanyang just revealed a warm smile and was about to grab Wei Weibai to express his enthusiasm. Click! The lights turned on. Wei Weibai narrowed her eyes. She saw the housekeeper looking at them calmly. This short sofa, this pair of man and woman leaning against each other, this atmosphere of wanting to talk, but not stopping. The housekeeper smiled. Do you want soup? Xia Hanyang's fingers froze. Wei Weibai took the opportunity to push him away and immediately lowered her head to pack the textbooks. Xia Hanyang's fingers were empty, and he felt that his enthusiasm had turned into a howl of grief and indignation. He gritted his teeth and said, yes, it's to clear the heat. Give me a few bowls. This guy was like a sand sculpture. Wei Weibai couldn't help laughing. Being with Xia Hanyang, she felt that she was living with a joke. She was amused every day. Xia Hanyang saw her smile and was also amused. She was just shy. In fact, she had liked him for a long time. She was so happy when he just confessed. Ding, the male lead's favorability has increased to 60. And read the ad. https://m Sashu, COMT. Chapter 1874. Recently, Xia Hanyang went to school every day. He was neither late nor left early. He didn't make trouble in class and didn't bully his classmates after class. He didn't hit the teacher in PE class. He didn't burn the bookshelves in the library. It was like a dream for everyone. The old man had already killed 3 pigs and worshipped them several times. But the followers felt that they were unemployed. They had agreed that they would be bad students together. How come the only one who's sneakily, pooey, brazenly, and arrogantly studying seriously? This was a betrayal of his great identity as a bad student. The followers saw Xia Hanyang come to school with 2 school bags in one hand and a kettle hanging on his arm. They heard that the kettle was made to nourish the body. It was for Wei Wei Bai to nourish her body. Then he followed Wei Wei Bai like a puppy. After a while, he said, "Wei Wei, is it hot? I should have brought an umbrella. Girls can't bask in the sun." After a while, he said, "Wei Wei, the nanny bought some good bird's nest recently. I'll ask someone to stew it for you after class." After a while, he said, "How about we hold hands? We're together. Holding hands is more intimate." After all, he just wanted to hold hands. The followers squatted at the gate, looking haggard. Xia Hanyang looked at them blankly with a cigarette in his hand. He was like a different person. No, don't insult him. He was simply possessed by a bootlicker. Xia Hanyang tried to hold hands, but Wei Wei Bai said softly, "We're in school. Don't be too ostentatious. The teacher will scold you." Xia Hanyang sneered. "How dare he scold me? I mean, the teacher is so nice. He won't scold us." He was in a good mood. He wouldn't swear. After all, he was in a relationship now. You know what it means to be in a relationship, right? People in a relationship are all little angels. Xia Hanyang felt that he only lacked 2 wings. Everywhere he looked, he felt that the world was really beautiful. Even the trash can have a filter. It was the kind of girl powder shining with the light of love peaches. Wei Wei Bai suddenly wrinkled her nose. There was the smell of cigarettes. Seeing her suffering, Xia Hanyang's eyes hardened, and he quickly glanced around. He found his followers squatting at the entrance, puffing out clouds of smoke. With a swoosh, he walked in front of those ignorant dogs and looked at them coldly. The gentleness on Xia Hanyang's face was replaced by sternness, and his eyes were gloomy and cruel. Have you read the campus rules? A few of the lackeys shook their heads in fear. Don't you know you can't smoke in school? Do you want me to beat you until you understand? A few of the lackeys immediately put out their cigarettes and began to pat their clothes vigorously, afraid that the smell of smoke would be too strong and they would be beaten. Xia Hanyang snorted, "Every day you don't do your job and bully students. This Astro Club is so dark because of you scumbags. We're the students doing squatting here instead of studying." The lackeys immediately nodded. "Yes, we'll learn immediately." After saying that, they held hands and fled in panic. Xia Hanyang turned around, revealing a pure and youthful smile. Then, she ran to Wei Wei Bai's side. "It's really shameful to be with them. If it weren't for my family, I wouldn't be with these playboys." Wei Wei Bai felt that those lackeys were worse than trash. Trash could be recycled. After being used, the lackeys became scapegoats. She didn't want to expose Xia Hanyang as a bad guy. After all, Xia Hanyang's attitude was low enough. He was like a poor little black dog, surrounding her so enthusiastically every day. Download the at https://m Sashu. Com. Chapter 1875. She was embarrassed. Wei Wei Bai suddenly felt that her fingertips were held by someone. She looked up at him and found that he was calm and composed. His side profile was extremely handsome. His thin lips were pursed, and his eyes were deep. But his expression was a little tense. She didn't break free. Instead, she let him hold her hand. He led her into the classroom. When Wei Wei Bai wasn't paying attention, he showed a triumphant smile. The followers saw Xia Hanyang and Wei Wei Bai into the classroom. They had no choice but to come out from behind the tree. Damn, I feel something is wrong. I also feel something is wrong. It's not like 30% enthusiasm. It's like he's obsessed. In the past, Xiao Hanyang was 30% enthusiastic about many things. Xiao Hanyang was also very enthusiastic. So when he liked Wei Wei Bai at first, they thought that since he liked her so much at the beginning, his feelings for her would definitely fade in the future. But why did he become more and more enthusiastic? Look at Brother Xia's attitude. It seems that he is really going to marry her in the future. The followers were silent for a while. It's hard to get past the old master. Will he be restless? Compared to this, Brother Xia can't study hard and force us to study hard in the future. Thinking of this, the followers trembled. They were used to be bad students. It sounded terrible that they had to study hard. Xiao Hanyang rested his chin on his hand and looked at Wei Wei Bai's back. He sat behind her. Every time he saw her soft side profile, he felt that he could be in a daze all day. He was like an idiot. The teacher came in with the test papers. Today is the weekly exam. Put away your books. Suddenly, a cold look swept over him. The teacher trembled. Why did he feel that Xiao Hanyang was staring at him? Recently, Xiao Hanyang had been so well-behaved that he found it strange. The test papers were divided into several copies and given to the students at the front table. The students took one and then handed the rest to the students at the back table. When it was Wei Wei Bai's turn, she took out the test papers and turned to hand them to Xiao Hanyang. Come on. Her voice was much sweeter and softer, and her eyes were full of expectation as she looked at him. Xiao Hanyang originally wanted to find an opportunity to take his teacher out and teach him a lesson. Exam my ass. He didn't know anything. Wouldn't she be exposed once the exam started? This was simply undermining his plans. But by Wei Wei's smile and encouragement made Xiao Hanyang excited like he was on steroids. It was just a test. It was just that he hadn't taken the exam yet. Perhaps he could get good results in the exam. As long as he passed the test, he would be able to fool them. Xiao Hanyang threw the rest of the test papers back, picked up the pen, and bowed his head with a confident smile. Wei Wei Bai also turned around and went to take the exam. During this period of time, Xiao Hanyang had accumulated enough knowledge to cope with the weekly exam through reviewing. Even if it wasn't 100, it was at least 90. Wei Wei Bai calmly put down her pen and quickly solved the problem. She felt that she was really a good teacher. Meanwhile, Xiao Hanyang lowered his head confidently. Looking up, he lowered his head again, tilting his head. Lying on his stomach, he finally hugged his head with both hands. What the hell was this? If he couldn't understand what was going on, he would go blind. He still had to get the teacher out to fix it. What kind of lousy questions were these? Not many of them could be understood. Wait, this multiple-choice question seemed to have been taught by Wei Wei Bai before. Was this how he chose? Xiao Hanyang frowned and tried to choose C. Then he tried hard to look at the test paper. Oh, it seemed that Wei Wei Bai had also taught this formula before. However, he didn't understand. This was the answer. She had said it before. He seemed to have some impression of it. Xiao Hanyang relied on his memory and barely managed to write a question. //. Chapter 1876. This was just luck. After all, he had been revising during this period of time. How could he catch a few similar ones? He couldn't do the rest. Xiao Hanyang held his head. The results were out. It was one thing to expose himself, but what if Wei Wei Bai looked down on him? What if she felt that a man with bad grades was not good enough for her? Xiao Hanyang frowned. It wouldn't work. Wei Wei Bai's spirit was too noble. He knew what kind of person he was. It was impossible to study. It was impossible to study for the rest of her life. But she liked to study. Otherwise, he could drag her to his level and let her experience the relaxed and beautiful feeling of not studying. Then she could eat, drink, and play with him. This thought was filled with boundless temptation. Xiao Hanyang couldn't help but laugh. Yes, he would take her to play after school. She definitely didn't like to study. It was because studying could keep her alive. But now she didn't need to study. She had him. Even if she got a duck egg in the exam, he could support her. So it was time to tell her that studying was useless. Dating was the right thing to do. Wei Wei Bai didn't know that Xiao Hanyang was behind her with a variety of expressions. One moment he was grinning, the next he was smiling like a spring breeze. One moment he was gritting his teeth and laughing, the next he was laughing lecherously. The teacher saw it. He took off his glasses and wiped the lenses hard, pretending that he didn't see it. As long as Xia Hanyang didn't suddenly beat him up, the teacher could be very calm. After the exam, there were 2 more classes. During the meal, Xia Hanyang disliked the food in the cafeteria and asked people to bring food boxes to school. It was extravagant, but since he came to the cafeteria to eat, he treated everyone. Everyone ate free cafeteria food, and the atmosphere was happy. Xia Hanyang ate a lot and fast. He liked to eat meat, but Wei Wei Bai's body couldn't eat heavy food like him, so most of the food was light. After all, it was suitable for her physical condition. Xia Hanyang followed her and was not picky about the food. After all, when he looked at Wei Wei Bai's face, which was as tender as spring powder, he could even swallow a sweet potato. After watching Wei Wei Bai eat, he finished the rest of the food like a whirlwind. It was PE class in the afternoon. The PE teacher felt a headache when he saw Xia Hanyang. This guy was the one who came to PE class the most. Every day, he brought along a few lackeys and messed up the physical education class. The teacher was beaten so badly that he didn't dare to make sound. He only dared to put a scarecrow on his back and curse him for stepping on dog shit when he came out. When it came to the PE class, Xia Hanyang was in high spirits. It started with a 500-meter run. Originally, it was the men who ran first, followed by the women. However, after Xia Hanyang had a gentle talk with the teacher, everyone ran away together. Was falling in love. They had to be in pairs and stick together no matter what they did. Of course, they had to be together in PE class. When they started to run, Xia Hanyang ran with Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei Bai ran slowly, and so did he. From time to time, he would run as if he was chasing away a fly. Go, go, go. Don't you see anyone in this position? Don't touch me. Stay away. Xia Hanyang drove away the people around him. Then, it became a romantic 2-person jog between him and Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei, are you hot? Do you want to wipe your sweat? Xia Hanyang took a tissue and gently wiped her sweat. Wei Wei Bai, who was jogging, was speechless. Xia Hanyang took out a kettle. Do you want to drink some soup? Wei Wei Bai, who was jogging, was speechless. Xia Hanyang said, How about I carry you on my back? Wei Wei Bai finally couldn't bear it and ran faster. She felt that her IQ had plummeted when she was with this guy. And Chapter 1877. Xia Hanyang followed her effortlessly. Are you tired? I can carry you and run. Wei Wei Bai was so moved that she almost burst into tears when she saw the focus of the 500-meter exercise. Xia Hanyang was still mentally retarded. She had been with him for a long time. Would others think that she was mentally retarded too? Then it was time to do exercises. Xia Hanyang thought that exercises were stupid because he had never done them before. This time when he did it, he saw Bai Weiwei jumping up and down, clapping her hands or bending over. Her long ponytail swayed gently. The ends of her hair swung over her shoulders and slid back to her thin back. Why didn't he know that someone could be so cute when they were doing exercises seriously? Xia Hanyang couldn't help but take out his cell phone to take a picture. He felt that his heart was swaying with her ponytail. He wished he could become her school uniform and cling to her body temperature. Weiwei Bai almost rolled her eyes. She couldn't bear it anymore. She turned around and glared at him, scolding him softly. Be serious, Xia Hanyang. Was she a model or an actress? He was about to kneel down, holding the cell phone high in his hand and pointing it at her. She had already attracted the attention of the whole school. She really didn't need Xia Hanyang to add fuel to the fire. Xia Hanyang saw that she was really angry, so he had to put away his cell phone, and then his eyes shifted uneasily. He also jumped and jumped behind her. Xia Hanyang mischievously stretched out his long leg. Bai Weiwei was tripped, and her whole body leaned back. She wanted to stand firm, but the man behind her reached out and pulled her into his arms. He said cheerfully, "Why are you so careless? I'll catch you." After pulling her into his arms, he reached out and rubbed her hair. It was smooth and soft, and even the fragrance was very familiar. It was strawberry. Xia Hanyang deliberately changed the daily necessities at home into strawberries. The back of Weiwei Bai's head hit his hot chest, and her ears were filled with the rumbling sound of his heartbeat. She wanted to get up, but Xia Hanyang held her down. This was the time to do exercises in public. How shameless. Xia Hanyang lowered his head and sniffed her. She smelled so soft and nice. Wei Wei Bai felt that all the students who were doing their exercises were looking at her. This was great. She and Xia Hanyang could be considered as one mentally retarded person. In the future, whoever saw the two of them would not see a retard and a straight-A student. He would only see two retards in a relationship. After the mentally retarded PE class, school was finally over. Wei Wei Bai heaved a sigh of relief. Another difficult day. System, hurry up and come back. Then, hurry up and finish the side quests and main quests. Xia Hanyang had a kindergarten IQ every day. Her heart was tired. Xia Hanyang was in a good mood. He had already called someone to order the latest dress and jewelry. On the weekend, he planned to take her to Paris to watch the Fashion Week. Girls liked these activities, and then they would go on a trip. Most importantly, it was a presidential suite with a double bed. When they were abroad, Wei Wei Bai was unfamiliar with the place and people. She didn't book a room in advance, so she could only share a room with him. Thinking of this, he became excited. He immediately went to arrange it. Xia Hanyang didn't tell her in advance. After he arranged it and tricked Wei Wei Bai into boarding the private jet, she couldn't go back on her word even if she wanted to. He thought that at that time, he could pretend that she didn't know the way, hold her hand, and put his arm around her shoulder. He had never looked forward to traveling so much. He just went on the learning forum and spent money to solve problems. The phone rang again. Chapter 1878. When he saw that it was Old Master, he thought of that stinky old man and really didn't want to answer the phone. Xia Hanyang answered the phone impatiently. Hello, what's the matter? Old Master, I heard that you have a little lover recently. Xia Hanyang, so what? Do I need to report it? Old Master's voice turned cold. Fine, you can have 8 or 10. But don't be so serious, Yang Yang. Xia Hanyang, don't call me that. It's so childish. Why would I be serious? I just have a little lover. Look at you scared. Take your blood pressure medicine. Old man, don't bother me. Old Master, and I saw your test paper. 25 points. You are indeed serious. I plan to reward you with a sports car. When you get 50 points, I will buy you a cruise ship. Xia Hanyang frowned. Only 25 points? This score couldn't be seen by Wei Wei Bai. He had to get at least 60 or 70 points to fool her. Later, he would ask someone to go to the teacher's house and ask him to change the score. Old Master, okay, I know that you are excited to have a woman for the first time. If you like this type, I'll find you a few more. Xia Hanyang suppressed his irritable anger and wanted to strangle Old Master. But when he thought of Wei Wei Bai, he resisted the urge to kill his own father. After all, Old Master's arm was thicker than his thigh. If Old Master knew that he was serious, Wei Wei Bai would be in danger. He could only grit his teeth and lower his voice. Why do you want this type of woman? Don't you think it's enough to have a woman of the same style? What's so good about studying every day? If she wasn't cute, I wouldn't have kept her. Xia Hanyang resisted the urge to show off. He suppressed his excitement and wanted to shout, My Wei Wei is the cutest in the world. She is good at studying, gentle, and the most beautiful in the world from head to toe. Other women couldn't compare to her. He tried his best to be disdainful. All right, she's just a little lover. Don't you have dozens of mistresses outside? I'm just one, and you're already jumping up and down. You just can't bear to see me happy. The old man was also very happy. It was 25 points. When did his grandson score so many points? Originally, he had called to tell her the good news and to chat about some common things. But why was the smell of gunpowder so thick? The old man looked at the test paper and admitted defeat. All right, it's fine if you want to raise her. Oh, right. Remember to calculate when you raise her. You can give her more houses and jewelry, but you have to be careful when it comes to company shares. The more Xia Hanyang talked about Wei Wei Bai with his father, the more upset he felt. What a lousy little lover. She should be the apple of his eye. When his assets increased in the future and he could arm wrestle with the old man, he would kick the old man's butt. Xia Hanyang gritted his teeth and said, Nonsense. I'm not a spendthrift like you. She's grateful for a bite of food. Why get tired of her? I'll kick her away. You don't have to worry about her every day. Damned old man. Just wait. In the future, she will give birth to all your great-grandchildren. You won't get tired of her. Let's talk about it later. The old man said, I'm just saying. You unfilial grandson, what's with that tone? I'm so angry. After that, he hung up the phone. The old man had no choice. Otherwise, he would have slapped Xia Hanyang's face when he hung up. But his grandson had scored 25 points. The old man shouted happily, kill a pig to worship the ancestors. My grandson is promising. Xia Hanyang sent the old man away and breathed a sigh of relief. He had to lie for as long as he could. The income of the amusement park was rising rapidly. He had some shares of the Xia family, plus his private income. In 5 years, his power should be almost the same as the old man's. At that time, he and Wei Wei Bai would be of marriageable age. Xia Hanyang was very thoughtful. At that time, the old man would not be able to touch a hair on Wei Wei Bai's head. He held his phone and frowned. Wait, what was he doing on the balcony just now? Yes, he was reviewing his homework and needed to solve problems. He hurriedly opened the learning forum. A cold wind blew, and the balcony curtains fluttered. Wei Wei Bai stood by the curtains. Her skin was as white as snow. These days, she had put on some weight, and her cheeks were a little rosy. She was like a doll that had come to life, bringing out the exquisiteness of her facial features. Xia Hanyang's hand trembled, and his phone fell. Wei Wei Bai looked at him coldly and finally asked, Little lover? Xia Hanyang almost knelt down and shouted, Listen to me. It's not what you think. Wei Wei Bai was speechless. What was going on with Qiong Yao's tragic roar? She was just asking, did little lover mean mistress? Why was he so agitated? And read the at https://www.sashu.com/ and read at https://www.sashu.com and read at https://www.sashu.com and read at https://m/sashu.com. Chapter 1879. Wei Wei Bai saw Xia Hanyang going to the balcony halfway through his revision. Why was he taking so long? She thought he was sneaking in for a smoke. However, she heard him yelling on the phone to someone, something about an old man, a little lover. She didn't even think about it at first. When she realized that he was referring to her as a little lover, she asked about the situation. Wei Wei Bai was extremely calm, thinking that she would explain the misunderstanding later. She would also believe his explanation. Another wave of affinity points. Perfect. So when Wei Wei Bai was about to smile, the system said, You're finally back. You didn't even give me a sip of water in a meeting, and the topics were so boring that I slept for a few days. Wei Wei Bai, the system suddenly appeared and was a little shocked. The system took out a small biscuit and bit it. How's your progress recently? The affinity points are already at 60. Amazing speed. The system then flipped through the information and looked at it. The male lead's top student index has also become 0. Congratulations. Wei Wei Bai 0. She was very confused. Why was it 0? It couldn't be 0. These days, Xia Hanyang's answering speed and accuracy had reached 95%. At least 60. She had to lower her estimate. The system said, You must have been teaching him questions recently. Your teaching will count as points, but after crossing the threshold of 0, if the male lead doesn't have any intention to learn and doesn't change much in his studies, then his score will remain at 0. So after crossing 0, the simple method of teaching him questions would not work. The male lead must take the initiative to learn and start to increase his score to increase the index. Wei Wei Bai, but he's always right. The system looked at the ground. Oh, look at the phone, he's cheating. Wei Wei Bai, then, the smile on her face slowly faded. Xia Hanyang was still explaining. What I said just now doesn't count. I was talking about others, not you. He was worried that Wei Wei Bai would hear his words and put herself in his shoes. How hurtful. Just now he said the most vicious words. Otherwise, how could he fool that old man? Wei Wei Bai ignored him and bent down to pick up the phone on the ground. Xia Hanyang raised his eyebrows and had a bad feeling. Wait, what did he do with his phone just now? Looking at the questions? Wei Weibai unlocked her phone and saw that the revision questions she had assigned were all on a famous learning forum in China. The number of people who solved the questions below could be stacked up into a few hundred buildings. 5,000 for each question. Wei Weibai's heart clenched. She hadn't even felt the pain of seeing the cheating yet. He was defeated by 5,000. You can even hear the sound of money flushing into the toilet bowl. If it was so easy to earn, what was the point of her tutoring? Directly going to the forum to solve problems? It was extremely easy to earn $1 million a year. Bai Weiwei's fingers began to tremble, and even more so. That side quest had been unfrozen. Underachiever Neil activated. Scanning calculation. The other party's top student index is 0. Beep, beep, beep. Calculating again. 25 points in the exam. 20 points in a blind guess. Barely increasing the top student index by 1 point. 1 point of underachiever. I'm ashamed to be associated with you. Please try your best to express your disgust and disdain for the underachiever. Don't have any intimate sympathy. Wei Weibai, she had been busy for half a day, but this guy, Xia Hanyang, was still an underachiever. Wei Weibai was at a loss for a while. It was the first time she had been fooled. She looked at Xia Hanyang, and the gentleness in her eyes turned into disdain and darkness in half a second. Chapter 1880. You even fooled me by answering the questions. It seems that I'm really a cheap lover who is grateful to you for giving me a meal. Her face was in the shadows, with a murderous coldness. That bit of gentleness had completely disappeared into her pursed lips. Xia Hanyang was a little confused. It was the first time he encountered such a thing, so he was a little flustered. He tried to straighten out his mind and suppress his panic. His voice was a little hurried. You know that in a family like mine, I like to make my own decisions and help me control my life. You are an accident that my stubborn grandfather can't tolerate. When he saw her cold expression, his heart sank. Like a drowning man straining for the last rope, he grasped her hand. Her fingers were still a little cold. She had been trying so hard to nourish her body during this time, but her body still couldn't warm up. Her cold limbs were due to malnutrition. Therefore, during this period of time, he spent more time reading cookbooks than reading books. He didn't want to lie to Wei Weibai, and he didn't like to study. So he had a bad idea. This was his habit. He used to like to take shortcuts when he encountered things. As long as the goal was achieved, the process was not important at all. He didn't think study was important. He just thought that she was important. So I lied to him and said that you're not important. You are my little lover, a woman who can come and go as I please. His tone began to tremble with weakness. Xia Hanyang held her hand, but he felt that her fingers were cold. Later, he realized that it was his hands that were cold. I can't compete with my family now, and I can't protect you by perishing together. I can only wrong you for now, Wei Wei. He tried to tell her his plan. Wait for me for 5 years. No, for years, or even 3 years. I will try my best to protect you, so you just need to stay by my side obediently. He didn't want to say these plans at all. After all, he only wanted to show off to her proudly when he won in the future. He was the best in the world. He could protect her. Even if they got married, no one would dare to stop them. He didn't want to say this when he was so weak and couldn't achieve anything, because it felt like he was making a promise without any sense of responsibility. Wei Weibai looked at him indifferently, seemingly indifferent. This kind of look made Xia Hanyang feel a little depressed. He suppressed his discomfort and whispered, "So just pretend that you didn't hear what I said just now, or you can beat me and kick me as a punishment for being angry." He really treated her as his first love. Some men had no bottom line when they indulged in their first love. Xia Hanyang was the kind of person who would soften his attitude when he fell in love with someone. Bai Weiwei also felt that his attitude was somewhat inconceivable. He was too soft and cowardly. Why did it feel like their model was gradually moving towards the script of a scumbag woman and a scumbag man? If it wasn't for the side mission, she really wanted to pat his head and tell him not to be sad. However, just as this thought appeared in his mind, the branch system began to stir. Wei Weibai frowned and said to the system, "I already have a few top student indexes." She got full marks. If there were additional rewards, there would be more. System 27. In fact, Wei Wei Bai's previous index was very low. The extra index was the pitiful score given by the branch system when it was rescanned. Wei Wei Bai, that's too little. //. Chapter 1881. She originally thought that if the index points are high, she would soften her attitude once and deduct some points. But now it was not the problem of deducting points, but that Xia Hanyang was not in the mood to learn at all. Even if she deducted points this time, what about tomorrow? Every time she smiled at him, she would deduct 1 point. It was a temporary solution, and the index points were so slow, so it was impossible to complete the side task. Wei Wei Bai's eyelashes drooped, suppressing the deep emotions in her eyes. She wanted to arouse Xia Hanyang's learning attitude and character. He had to be given something to be willing to learn. He was not stupid. He had the ability to learn, but he just didn't want to learn. This was fatal. Wei Wei Bai thought about Xia Hanyang's character in her heart, but she didn't expect that he didn't plan anything. To learn, he really racked his brains. Finally, she reluctantly came up with a few ways to arouse his enthusiasm for learning. Wei Wei Bai's expression didn't change, as if she didn't hear Xia Hanyang's explanation. The more she didn't say anything, the more depressed Xia Hanyang felt. He tried to reach out slowly, wanting to hug her. But before he could move, Wei Wei Bai had already shaken off his hand. She shook it off with great strength. Xia Hanyang only felt the back of his hand burning. She took a few steps back and went straight back to her room without saying anything. Her lonely and cold back had a kind of lonely and fierce aura. Xia Hanyang thought that the matter would be over after he explained. But Bai Weiwei's attitude made his heart sink deeper and deeper. Finally, with a thump, it fell to the bottom. Was she really so angry? Xia Hanyang chased after her. But he found that the door was open and Wei Wei Bai was packing her school bag. She didn't look up and just said indifferently, "I've troubled you during this time, student Xia. It's just that I can't teach you well, so you should hire another tutor." Xia Hanyang stood at the door and watched her coldly packing her luggage. No, she didn't take the things he bought. She just packed some books, school uniforms, and so on. She completely cut off all ties. It was chilling to the extreme. Even Xia Hanyang, who had a rough heart, was hurt for a while. Even his hands and feet were cold, and a vicious anger was flowing in his heart. It was as if thousands of small knives were stabbing into every part of his body. There wasn't a single spot that didn't hurt. Wei Wei Bai packed up and walked straight to the door. Xia Hanyang suddenly stood in the middle of the door and held the door with both hands, completely blocking it. He no longer suppressed his anger and darkness. "Have you never liked me?" His voice was very low, but there was a hint of hoarseness and obvious anger in it. Wei Wei Bai didn't say anything. Instead, she silently picked up her backpack. It was as if she had turned a blind eye to his anger, pain, and discomfort. If he really liked her, how could he be so cold? Wasn't it noisy at all? In the past, he despised those women for being pretentious and making trouble for him every day. Now, he finally understood that those who were willing to mess around with you were considered to have given you feelings. He didn't even make a fuss. His face was calm and indifferent. It was enough to make people's hearts tremble. Only a person with no feelings could be so cool. Wei Wei Bai seemed to be hesitating and enduring something, but she didn't say anything. She just said, "I can't teach you. Find someone else." Xia Hanyang didn't panic and didn't tremble anymore. Instead, he was as calm as death. His eyes were unusually dark and terrible. "Say that again," Wei Wei Bai repeated flatly. "I can't teach you, and I can't be your little lover, so let's go our separate ways." She was calm and indifferent. It could even be said that she had a business-like attitude. Chapter 1882. For a moment, Xia Hanyang froze. He was like a big rock by the sea. Outside, the waves were roaring, but his mind was frozen. He finally pursed his lips and forced out an awkward smile. "So, it's useless no matter how I explain. You don't like me, so you're just waiting for a reason to break up." During this time, the little bit of gentleness was fake. During this period of time, those few smiles were all fake. All of them were perfunctory. She lied to him. Xia Hanyang even wondered if he was a moron. How could he trample on himself and spoil her? Why did he feel that she was cute in every way? Even when she broke up with him, she was so hateful. Her cold and serene appearance was still ugly and hateful. Xia Hanyang suppressed his murderous intent and ordered word by word. Put down your school bag and continue to study. Go to school with me tomorrow. We'll do as usual. He gave her a chance. Let her go back on her words. Otherwise, he would go crazy. He had always been bad-tempered. If it weren't for her, he could kill her now. Wei Wei Bai's expression remained the same, and there was even a trace of impatience in her eyes. She said, "As usual? Why do you think we're acting like normal? Is it because of your empty promise over the past few years? Or is it because you're the worst student in school to protect me?" Xia Hanyang said in a harsh tone, "Study, study. I'm 100 times better than you even if I don't study." He was willing to be submissive during this time, but this was based on the fact that they liked each other. Once he found that she didn't like him, the kind of voluntary sacrifice immediately turned into a bad result. Xia Hanyang was full of resentment and resentment. Wei Wei Bai suddenly looked up. Her calm expression disappeared, and her eyes turned red with anger. "You really disappoint me, Xia Hanyang." She threw her school bag to the ground. Her voice was filled with anger. "You keep saying that you can protect me, but what did you do? I put in so much effort to tutor you and think about improving your grades every day so that you can be smarter. How did you treat me?" Xia Hanyang had never seen her in such a threatening manner. Even on that terrible night, she could only endure her incomparable sadness. Wei Wei Bai sneered. "A person who doesn't even want to study and only knows how to use the power of his family to bully others everywhere, laughably promises that I can get rid of the power of my family and protect me. You're simply too stupid." Xia Hanyang was scolded by her and didn't know how to respond for a while. He moved his lips, but no words came out. Wei Wei Bai completely exploded. "Xia Hanyang, you can't just say that you want to protect me. I know how powerful your family is. If your grandfather wants me to disappear, I can't resist at all." Xia Hanyang's fingers clasped the door panel, and his expression became cold. "I won't let anyone hurt you. Why don't you believe me?" Wei Wei Bai, "To me, a man with 0 grades is not worthy of my trust." Xia Hanyang immediately corrected him loudly. "Who said I got 0 points? I got 25 points this time." Wei Wei Bai, initially, he wanted to scold him to ignite his passion for learning. However, he was a lousy student. What was the difference between 25 points and 0 points? Wasn't it just a matter of correctly guessing the distance of a few multiple-choice questions? Wei Wei Bai stared at him blankly, seeming to be desperate. Xia Hanyang also felt that he had gone too far. After all, it was his fault. Just as he was about to admit defeat, he saw Wei Wei Bai stagger a few steps and sit on the ground. Xia Hanyang was shocked and immediately squatted down to hold her. Wei Wei Bai pushed his hand away. Her fingers were trembling badly, and her eyes were red, not because of anger, but because of sadness. "Xia Hanyang, why can't you grow up? You can be 100 times better than me, even without studying, but I don't dare to like you like this." Xia Hanyang was still confused. He just wanted to pull her up from the ground. He didn't want to see her cry. Since the day he took her out of that house, he only had one thought. He wanted to protect her. He said in a dry voice, "Don't be sad. You're not in good health." Wei Wei Bai seemed to have completely lost her strength. She put her head on her knees, her shoulders trembling. Xia Hanyang was really sad. He grabbed her hand, pulled her into his arms, and hugged her tightly. The feeling of having her in his arms made him feel a little better, even though he had hit rock bottom. He said softly, "It's fine to study. I can't be arrogant just because my family is rich. I made money myself. I have a plan." He stroked her back as he spoke. He said aggrievedly, "It's not that I can't protect you if I don't study, but you don't believe me. Do you believe me if I study hard?" Wei Wei Bai immediately looked up, her eyes shining. "I believe you." After saying that, she immediately got out his arms and pulled him. "What are you waiting for? Go and study." After giving in to Xia Hanyang, all his marks were deducted. If he didn't study quickly, there would be no more marks to be punished. Xia Hanyang / crossover system, Adonis, Come here and read the full article at https://www. Sashu. Com download transmigration system. Adonis. Come here and read this on your phone. https://m. Sashu. COMT. Chapter 1883. The system was also speechless. It was not that this turn of events was unexpected, but it felt that the host would not let the male lead off so easily. With a cold face, Wei Wei Bai took out the grade 1 book again, then took out a pen and started taking notes. Start reviewing. Xia Hanyang was still a little dazed. He held the book and found it difficult to concentrate. He frowned and asked, "You're not angry anymore?" Wei Wei Bai. Xia Hanyang asked carefully, "You're not leaving?" Wei Wei Bai. Xia Hanyang immediately lowered his head and studied seriously. Wei Wei Bai looked scary when she was angry. With a cold face, Wei Wei Bai took out a piece of paper and started to write down the grade 1 questions. Then she handed it to Xia Hanyang. Solve the questions first. Get a feel of it and revise. She thought that he had understood everything. After all, he did the questions well. Of course it was good. One question was 5,000. What kind of basic high school questions couldn't he solve? Xia Hanyang did not have any objections. As long as Wei Wei Bai did not suddenly make trouble with him, he felt that everything was fine. He picked up the pen and looked at the questions that he seemed to have seen before, but could not remember, and thought hard. The system started to eat its biscuits again. It felt that the male lead in this world was very obedient. It chatted with the host. It seems that the side mission can be completed. The male lead seems to be very good. Wei Wei Bai. The system. The host looked very gloomy now. Wei Wei Bai's eyes were cold. Go my foot. Believe it or not, I'll slow you down to death in the future. Did he really think that she was here for a vacation? The system trembled. The male lead seems to be quite enthusiastic about you. Wei Wei Bai. An 18-year-old boy meeting his first love for the first time. He can express 10 out of 10 feelings. He only has 60 points of affection, but he can be as enthusiastic as 100. But enthusiasm was enthusiasm. She wanted him to learn. He was perfunctory, because he liked her, but only had 50 to 60 points of affection. Therefore, he would not even change his hobbies for her. He would do everything in his power to change his habits for her. If it was a favorability of 100 in that case, she didn't need to do anything to make him learn from the start. Believe it or not, Xia Hanyang would risk his life to learn. In the end, it was because the favorability towards him wasn't high enough. Wei Wei Bai said, "I'm just joking around. The first time, he'll definitely feel uncomfortable, so he'll try to please me and learn from me for a few days. But after a few days, he'll feel bored and won't take it seriously." He really needed to study Xia Hanyang's character. Wei Wei Bai could point out a bunch of flaws in this guy. The only good thing about Xia Hanyang was his strong desire to protect. Perhaps it was because of his upbringing that caused him to express a strong sense of male chauvinism towards the person he liked. Therefore, his fondness for her was mostly based on his desire to protect her. Because in Xia Hanyang's eyes, her current life experience was miserable. Without his protection, she couldn't even eat her fill. That was why Xia Hanyang was so enthusiastic. Did he really think that by shouting a few promises and imagining a few beautiful scenes in the future, he would be able to fulfill them? Wei Wei Bai said, "If we continue to interact like this, I think we'll be stuck around 80 favorability points." System said, "Then what about the rest of the learning?" He took a few glances at the male lead's learning attitude. It was very perfunctory. In other words, Wei Wei Bai was clearly trying to get him to learn, and he was very clear about this. But he didn't plan to do it. Chapter 1884. If this goes on, the side task will be finished. Wei Wei Bai. I have to use a carrot to lure him away. The system silently took out a few small biscuits to eat. The host is becoming more and more mature. It seems that it is so idle that it can sleep. After about half an hour, Wei Wei Bai finally collected the test paper. She didn't say anything and just took a look at the test paper. Then she raised her head. Her dark eyes were hazy, but the coldness and alienation were very obvious. Xia Hanyang was a little embarrassed, even though he was thick-skinned. Then Wei Wei Bai didn't say anything. She directly took out a piece of paper and began to write the questions for the third year of junior high school. Yes, Xia Hanyang didn't know how to answer the questions for the first year of senior high school. It was obvious at a glance. Xia Hanyang felt that he had done something wrong, so his attitude was very soft. Seeing Wei Wei Bai writing the test paper, he immediately ran to the kitchen. It was time to drink the soup. He still remembered her nourishing soup. Xia Hanyang put the soup on the table. Wei Wei Bai had already given him the test paper. Do another one. Xia Hanyang, drink the soup first. Wei Wei Bai, I want to do the test paper. Xia Hanyang stared at her. How could she delay her health? However, Wei Wei Bai was indifferent. Her expression was tense, without a trace of gentleness. Xia Hanyang had to do the test paper. It was okay if she didn't drink it. He would go to the kitchen and get another bowl later. Anyway, there was still a pot of soup. He finished the questions for the third year junior high school, but didn't do much. Xia Hanyang quickly handed in the test paper. Wei Wei Bai didn't look at the test paper. Instead, she calmly picked up the bowl of soup and began to drink it. Seeing that she was obedient, Xia Hanyang immediately smiled. The young man's eyebrows were full of youthfulness and wildness. Wei Wei Bai finished the soup. She picked up the test paper and looked at it for 3 seconds. Finally, she held her head and thought for a while. Finally, she took out a piece of paper and wrote the questions for the first year of junior high school. This time, Xia Hanyang finally answered a few questions. Wei Wei Bai wanted to kill herself. Xia Hanyang's knowledge level was estimated to be from the 6th grade to the first year of junior high school. What was the use of revising high school lessons with him? His foundation was so bad that he couldn't even solve middle school questions. Wei Wei Bai couldn't wait to pull apart Xia Hanyang, the worst of the worst, and stuff all the textbooks into his body. He wanted to see if he could gain more knowledge. Although Wei Wei Bai's face was cold, she didn't leave and continued to help him with his homework. Therefore, Xia Hanyang thought that her anger had subsided. He tried to reach out, wanted to have intimate contact with her. Wei Wei Bai slammed her hand on the table. Forget it. We'll talk about it tomorrow. I'm going to bed. Xia Hanyang was anxious. He wanted to solve their conflict as soon as possible. I will study hard in the future. Wei Wei Bai, you can't trust the words of slacker. She stood up and said, if you really want to study, take out the first year textbooks first. Then, you can memorize the second year physics formulas tonight. Next, if you really wanted to lay a good foundation. The transformation of all things was the main focus. Fortunately, Xia Hanyang's English was passable. After all, he went abroad every day to play, so he didn't have to worry about English. Xia Hanyang held the textbook with a speechless expression on his face. He didn't know why what happened tonight had developed into memorizing the first-year physics formulas. Seeing Wei Wei Bai's still cold face, he knew that she was still angry. Xia Hanyang could only bear the humiliation and nodded. I'll memorize them. Wei Wei Bai cleared the table. Then I'll check how much you've memorized when I get up tomorrow. How much you've memorized proves how much you like me. Xia Hanyang held the book. The Chapter 1885. Why is the physics formula related to the question of how much you like me? Wei Wei Bai opened the door and suddenly paused. She turned around and looked at Xia Hanyang deeply. Under the light, her ink-black hair was scattered, her lips were rosy, and her skin was as white as snow. A girl of this age was not ugly as long as she was clean. If her facial features were delicate, she would be exceptionally attractive. The allure of youth was much stronger than any other age group. So she just stood there and looked at Xia Hanyang. Even Xia Hanyang was stunned by her beauty. Wei Wei Bai suddenly reached out and touched her lips with her fingertips. I will reward you when you fully understand the knowledge of the first year. Xia Hanyang looked at her fingertips and the color under her fingers. When she turned around and closed the door, there was only the empty light and the living room left. Xia Hanyang suddenly woke up. Just now, Wei Wei Bai's action was a hint to him. As long as he studied well, she would. He immediately reached out and rubbed his face fiercely. The burning flame in his eyes was about to burn. He immediately opened the textbook, his mind full of rewards. If he could study well, he would be rewarded. He had to study hard now. Not long after Wei Wei Bai closed the door, Xia Hanyang's academic genius index suddenly rose to 5 points. Because Xia Hanyang had a desire to learn, Wei Wei Bai calmly wiped her lips. They were a little dry and needed to be applied with some lip balm. The system saw Xia Hanyang outside the room as if he was on steroids. Can your method make him continue to study? The male lead's enthusiasm to study was like a 30% hit. The way he looked at the book was like a volcanic eruption that could burn the book. Wei Wei Bai said, "Boys at this age are more persistent than donkeys when they see this kind of carrot. If you don't give him some benefits, he won't take the initiative to study." Because Xia Hanyang was essentially a person who would not act without benefits. This was related to his family. How could a businessman drive him to study without benefits? At first, she didn't know that he was cheating and thought that he was really obedient and learning. Now, she knew that his love for her wasn't strong enough to disregard everything. He had changed his comfortable environment to accommodate her, to learn for her sake. Wei Wei Bai said, "Wait until the affinity level rises. He will take the initiative to learn even if I don't give him the carrot." She said as she lay on the bed, "I'll start to make a review plan tomorrow." With Xia Hanyang's knowledge level, it may be difficult for him even in the first year of junior high school. Therefore, she had to do her best to find simple and easy-to-understand learning materials for him. She was really worried about a bad student. The system replied, "Go to sleep. I'll keep an eye on him." Wei Wei Bai nodded and went to sleep. Midnight. Xia Hanyang stealthily opened the door with 2 dark circles under his eyes. The system was just about to call Wei Wei Bai. She found that he was sitting on the edge of the bed, but he didn't do anything. She just held the textbook, turned on a small light, and quietly read the book. Then, he read a book while looking at the sleeping Wei Wei Bai. His eyes were strangely bright, like a person who had been hungry for a few days, emitting a green light. Xia Hanyang silently recited the formula. Then, when he was annoyed, he looked at Wei Wei Bai. She slept quietly on her side, her black hair spread out behind her. On the white bed, her delicate side profile in the shadows. It was unspeakably cute and pitiful. He wanted to touch her face, but he was afraid of waking her up. So, he could only bear with it. //T. Chapter 1886. She was willing to take the initiative to give him what he wanted when she was good at her studies. After all, although they were in a relationship now, she was not willing to even hold his hand. If she was willing, she would take the initiative. In that case, studying didn't sound so boring. Xia Hanyang's body surged with a huge learning energy. He fell asleep looking at his prize. He touched the corner of his mouth and continued to read. System. The male lead's donkey didn't seem to be honest at all. He was almost like a hungry wolf. But to get the reward, he was willing to do anything. Sure enough, the male lead would not move without benefits. Wei Wei Bai woke up, and the system told her what happened last night. She thought of Xia Hanyang sitting at her bedside reciting books. She sighed, "Teenagers are really energetic." Then the scholar index rose again. Xia Hanyang's scholar index was 8 points. And because she helped Xia Hanyang study, she would get points for helping a bad student. She had a scholar index of 20 points, so she could avoid 2 punishments. Xia Hanyang, with 2 dark circles under his eyes, came to guard the door early. Then he took the initiative to recite the formula. It was not difficult for Xia Hanyang to recite without asking for a deep understanding. Wei Wei Bai listened carefully and found that he was really reciting, not the perfunctory kind. Finally, the donkey was serious about studying. The scholar index also slowly rose by 2 points to 10 points. She didn't dare to show any gentle smile for fear of being punished, so she just looked at him indifferently. "Well, then let's do the questions while eating. Give me your phone." Xia Hanyang touched his pocket and handed her the phone. Wei Wei Bai opened the application center and downloaded the question bank app for him. Then she said, "I'll download the junior high school question bank for you, and then you can start to do the questions today." Xia Hanyang memorized the formula all night, and his mouth was dry. He picked up the water and took a big gulp and said, "If I really understand the questions of the junior high school, will you really give me a reward?" Wei Weibai looked up at him and seemed to hesitate. Xiao Hanyang's heart trembled. Was he planning to go back on his word? There was something wrong with the way he interacted with Wei Weibai. In the past, it was always other women who took the initiative to stick to him. If he was willing, he could probably do anything in a day. But it just so happened to be with Wei Weibai. The relationship between the two of them was said to be a relationship, but their relationship was cleaner than pure water. It wasn't that he couldn't take the initiative, but she had experienced that kind of thing before. He was too proactive and worried that she would be traumatized. With this delay, he couldn't do anything. It was not easy to see Wei Weibai relenting. As long as he studied, she would take the initiative. He was happy the whole night. Wei Weibai frowned. She suddenly stood up and walked in front of him. Then, she lowered her head and gently kissed the top of his head. The kiss was like a dragonfly crossing water. Butterfly sweeping wind. There was no trace of it. There wasn't a single trace of feeling that would make people think the wrong way. Instead, it was incomparably beautiful and pure. Xiao Hanyang was stunned. He didn't even feel the temperature of her lips. He only felt that her hair brushed against his. But this kind of touch was so light that it was almost non-existent. However, it made his fingers tremble. Her eyes were still indifferent, and her expression was calm. Being close to a bad student, 10 points deducted. 10 points remaining. Wei Weibai said coldly, "Continue to eat. I'll teach you how to use the formula." Xiao Hanyang couldn't help but reach out and touch his hair. He just knew how to recite some physics formulas. She was actually willing to take the initiative. If he knew all the questions, would they be closer than any other couple? Once this idea came to him, Xiao Hanyang couldn't suppress it. He held the bowl, and a strong desire to learn broke out for the first time. Wei Weibai felt that Xiao Hanyang's eyes were shining with a hungry green light. Then she heard the sound of the favorability rising. Ding! The male lead's favorability is at 65. This kind of increase was particularly impure. The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. Chapter 1887. Wei Weibai spent almost 3 hours on the questions and explained several formulas to Xiao Hanyang. She had prepared a thick stack of materials. She had printed out more than 20 questions from the question bank on the app. Xiao Hanyang's foundation was so bad. She had to work hard. Xiao Hanyang gave her some water to moisten her throat, which was specially brewed for her. He didn't make soup for her. Now, he was focusing on various kinds of health tea to reduce heat. When Wei Weibai was teaching, she wouldn't stop until he understood the questions. Xiao Hanyang felt sorry for her. Wei Weibai took it expressionlessly and took a sip, showing disdain in her eyes. But she didn't say anything. She packed up the textbooks and papers. Today, the school gave out the papers of the last exam. She was still the first. Perfect full marks. Xiao Hanyang was indeed 25. Seeing the score, Wei Weibai had the impulse to hit Xiao Hanyang with a book. She had taught him for nothing and helped him review for so long. He didn't remember anything at all. Fortunately, he finally became serious these 2 days. But the way he looked at her was no different from a wolf looking at meat. Every time he looked at the textbook, he would look at her. He looked at her as if he was thirsty. His eyes were green, and he was almost wiping his saliva. Wei Weibai guessed that Xiao Hanyang was preparing seasoning in his heart. He wanted to cook her and eat her. After all, studying was so boring. He had to find motivation to stay alive. After the lesson, it was almost time for the evening's self-study. They didn't live on campus and rarely came to the evening self-study. Today was unexpected because after class, Bai Weiwei gave him a lecture. Because the lesson was too late, they had dinner in the cafeteria. Then they came to the evening self-study. Xiao Hanyang was still enthusiastic about learning and didn't object. It was almost 11 o'clock. Xiao Hanyang glanced at the time, immediately picked up the bag and packed everything. Then he packed Wei Weibai's things together. His school bag couldn't hold so many review materials. Xiao Hanyang asked, "Do you want a midnight snack?" Wei Weibai shook her head. "Walk with me." Xiao Hanyang thought, "Isn't this a date?" He immediately called the chauffeur and gave him his school bag and things. Then, she followed Wei Wei Bai out of the school gate. The moonlight was like silver, silently pouring down on the ground. Xia Hanyang received another call. Brother Xia, come out and play. There's a new bartender who can spit fire recently. Come dance and drink. Xia Hanyang was so annoyed that he had blacklisted several of his friends. How could they still call him and ask him to drink and dance? Didn't you see that he was studying hard? Xia Hanyang shouted in a low voice, "Get out of my sight. I have serious business to do." The other side, serious business? Picking up girls? How long have you been soaking in it? Why haven't you gotten used to it yet? Why don't I help you out and warm up your relationship? He was going to tell him to scram. Hearing this, Xia Hanyang narrowed his eyes. He looked at Wei Wei Bai and saw that she was walking with a relaxed expression. It seemed that taking a walk in a quiet atmosphere could make her feel better. She seemed to notice Xia Hanyang's gaze and looked at him gently. Her misty eyes were so seductive in the night. Xia Hanyang swallowed his saliva secretly. He coughed softly and said seriously, "You can make your own decisions. Don't bother me. I'm a man who needs to get full marks in his studies." The other side of the phone understood what he meant. // Chapter 1888. The person on the other end laughed wretchedly. "Brother, don't worry. I promise you'll be a hero and you'll get a beauty early. Speak more if you know how to speak. It's good to hear." Xia Hanyang hung up the phone calmly and then looked disgusted. "They're the kind of rich playboys who claim kinship with my family. If it weren't for the fact that we meet frequently, I wouldn't even bother to brush them off." The system had already repeated their conversation. After hearing this, Wei Wei Bai felt her fists itch again. She didn't have enough time to study. It had been a few months, and the college entrance exam was right behind her. Xia Hanyang was distracted every day. Wei Wei Bai snorted at the system. I guess they met a hooligan on the road, and Xia Hanyang beat them away with a few punches. Then he took the opportunity to do whatever he wanted to me. Such an old-fashioned trick. Why were there still people who didn't get tired of it after thousands of years? Wei Wei Bai's eyes were as cold as ice, which made Xia Hanyang a little scared. Could it be that she saw through him? Xia Hanyang saw a nearby supper shop open. It sold porridge and wontons. Although he was a young master, he had eaten everything when he went out to be ridiculous. He had eaten at food stalls and roadside stalls. If it weren't for the poor hygiene conditions, the taste would actually be good. Especially when he was racing, sometimes when he was hungry, he would directly eat hamburgers and then drink. His life was very carefree. But now he was studying hard. Xia Hanyang touched his chin, wondering how he had fallen to this point. But when he saw Wei Wei Bai's delicate and beautiful side profile and saw the expectation in her eyes, he suddenly felt that everything his mother had done was worth it. After all, if he didn't watch Wei Wei Bai closely, what if she ran away? Or if she was seduced by someone else, who would compensate? He had to watch over her by himself. Anyway, she didn't know how to race, drink, or go to the amusement park. It was no problem to leave it for now. Xia Hanyang turned to Wei Wei Bai and said, "Eat some supper and then go home." Wei Wei Bai saw the supper shop. Some students who were studying at night also went in to order a bowl of noodles or wontons. She knew that Xia Hanyang was trying to stall for time until those bullies came, so that he would have time to save the damsel in distress. Wei Wei Bai didn't say anything and just walked into the shop. The shop was very clean, but the items were actually more expensive than other places. After all, their school was quite famous. Middle-class children who were able to squeeze in and study also squeezed in a lot. This group of people was the main force of the supper shop, so they didn't lack the small difference in the price of supper. After Wei Wei Bai sat down, Xia Hanyang immediately picked up the menu. "What do you like to eat? Beef noodles or wonton soup? I see seafood porridge. Shall I order a bowl for you?" Seafood porridge was the most expensive. Wei Wei Bai lowered her head and glanced at the menu. "Wonton soup will do." When she said this, she had to feel disgusted in her heart, because the rule was that they could accept Xia Hanyang's things. But in his heart, he must despise him. If she continued to despise him like this, she would really get used to it. Xiao Hanyang waved his hand and asked the waiter to come over. He ordered beef noodles and wonton soup. Then he also ordered a plate of fried mantis shrimp, a plate of crabs, fried pork with Chinese broccoli, and fried shrimps with chives. He ordered whatever he saw with the highest price. It was a supper, but he ate all seafood. He wasn't afraid of stomach problems. While waiting for the dishes, Wei Bai took out a small notebook from her pocket. Ask some time. Memorize a few formulas. Memorize? Xiao Hanyang was stunned. Of course, he had a passion for learning. After all, Wei Bai was such a big reward. But he still had to take a break. Xiao Hanyang rested his chin on his hands and sighed. I feel like I've become a formula spirit. How can there be so many formulas to memorize? The download address is at https://www.sashu.com. The is at https://m.sashu.com//t. Chapter 1889. He wondered if those damn mathematicians and physicists had eaten too much. What the hell were they researching? Was the Earth round? How round was it? Why did things fall down instead of flying up? What was water made of? What were electrons, protons, neutrons? There are also a bunch of formulas like spider silk. Xiao Hanyang said that if he could time travel, he would take a cannon with him. He would blast those experts who were researching these things to death. He would blast them to death. Where did so much knowledge come from? It was all because of you bastards who had nothing better to do. Wasn't it good to eat, drink, and play? What kind of science was this? Xiao Hanyang gritted his teeth, but still smiled kindly. Okay, let's recite the formulas. He ground his teeth and stared at Bai Weiwei like a tiger eyeing its prey. Reciting a formula was like having to bite Bai Weiwei to be satisfied. Bai felt that Xiao Hanyang's eyes were more aggressive. She touched her arm and got goosebumps when he looked at her. Fortunately, the food she ordered came. She put the small notebook in her pocket and began to eat supper. She kept Xiao Hanyang hanging with rewards. He was like a hungry wolf. He had a passion for learning, but his male instincts were also hooked. Xiao Hanyang saw her lowering her head, holding a spoon, and gently scooping up a white wonton. Then she bit it and it slipped in her mouth. The lights in the restaurant were on. She ate slowly again. Her bangs covered her eyes, and the red color on her lips was more obvious. Wei Bai paused and looked up blankly. Xiao Hanyang didn't look at her, but ate the noodles in big mouthfuls. Wei Bai thought that she had misunderstood, so she lowered her head and continued to eat the wonton. But that faint touch came from time to time. Xiao Hanyang's heart was beating fast. He ate without hiding it and soon finished the noodles. Wei Bai only ate half of the noodles. His legs were already a little numb, but he still refused to give up and wanted to touch her pants under the table. Xiao Hanyang planned to buy her a lot of dresses in the future. If it was a dress, he would have taken advantage of her now. His foot seemed to touch her exposed ankle. Wei Bai frowned and moved her foot away. Xiao Hanyang couldn't help but chuckle, and then he pretended that nothing had happened. He peeled the crab for her. His long fingers were as white as jade, which showed that he was pampered. He put the crab meat to her lips. Eat some. Wei Bai's lips trembled, and she was about to say no. However, Xiao Hanyang didn't give up and forced the crab meat into her mouth. In that short contact, the warm breath almost wrapped around his fingertips. Bai Weiwei pulled out her fingertips, wiped her mouth, and swallowed the crab meat before saying, "I'm full, let's go." 2. Xiao Hanyang also felt that he had gone too far. Worried that Bai Weiwei would see through his bad intentions, he obediently paid the bill and planned to leave. Just as he walked out of the door, he heard the rumbling of a group of motorcycles. Xiao Hanyang saw a group of men holding baseball bats, wearing helmets, and riding motorcycles towards them. / to facilitate the next reading. You can click on "You can see it" when you open the bookshelf next time, if you like. Chapter 1890. Xiao Hanyang's eyes lit up. Here came the chance to be a hero to save the beauty. The people around him were not good at studying, but they were good at all kinds of messy things. He rolled up his sleeves and decided to beat them until they couldn't take care of themselves. Then he would get Wei Wei Bai's sympathy, and then he would be able to hug her openly. Sure enough, the group of people on motorcycles was very arrogant. They immediately surrounded them after they came over. "Hey girl, you look good. Go and play with me." Wei Wei Bai. This stupid line is really the average level of Xia Hanyang's playboy. If people don't study hard, even their friends are animals with low IQ. Bai Weiwei was very calm and gave him face by hiding behind Xia Hanyang. "Let's call the police," she said in a very calm voice. "Xia Hanyang, how can you play the hero after calling the police?" He immediately sneered and said to the group of people, "While I'm in a good mood, I'll give you 10 minutes to escape." The few men riding motorcycles immediately rushed down from their motorcycles in a threatening manner. Then they rushed over with baseball bats. "You want to do this the hard way? You're kind enough to take your girlfriend to play, but you're a weakling." Xia Hanyang pulled a long face. Who was a weakling? Did this group of underlings not eat, drink, and play when they saw him? Did they think that he couldn't deal with them? Xia Hanyang rushed over without saying a word and punched the one in the front first. Then he took the opportunity to kick another person in the abdomen and kicked him out. He had been saving his strength. Those people were also very experienced. They felt just like that. If an inexperienced person were to look at it, they would definitely be frightened. Xia Hanyang's eyes were full of anger. He grabbed a person's collar and was about to beat him down with his fingers. That person immediately said, "Brother Xia, we're on the same side. Be gentle." Xia Hanyang said, "You scolded me." Then he used his strength to beat him down. Although it was heroic, it was not sincere enough. Xia Hanyang saw Wei Wei Bai standing on the side of the road. She looked calm, different from other girls. Why didn't she look scared at all? It must be because he was too powerful that she was not afraid anymore. Wei Wei Bai chatted with the system. "Sai, my acting is really getting worse with each generation." The system replied, "Yeah, it's too fake." What was even more ridiculous was that so many people with baseball bats couldn't beat Xia Hanyang. This was an impossible thing. It just happened like a magic fantasy. Xia Hanyang also felt that it was a little fake, so when he hit the other person, he secretly said, "One of you should rush to Wei Wei. Remember to scare her so that she can't be hurt. Then I will rush over and hit my arm. Don't break my arm, but I want a scary bruise." This request was too much. The little brother was a little confused. However, he could only nod. After all, it was not easy for Xia Hanyang to fall in love with a girl. He would lose face if he didn't get her. Therefore, he winked at the people behind him and pretended to be knocked down by Xia Hanyang. One of them immediately understood. He rushed to Wei Wei Bai with a baseball bat and was about to hit her head. Xia Hanyang dropped down from the sky. He put his arm over Wei Wei Bai's head and caught the fatal blow. It was so painful. Xia Hanyang glared fiercely at the guy who hit him. Then he kicked him away and immediately turned around with a pained expression. "Wei Wei, my arm is broken. You run first, I'll cover you." Wei Wei Bai thought, "You're so good at pretending. I can't bear to expose you." She nodded. "Okay, good luck." After that, she was about to leave. Xia Hanyang was speechless. This was not how the script played out. There must be something wrong. He immediately chased after her and grabbed her arm, shouting, "No, how can I let you go alone? What if we encounter danger? I'll carry you." What a heroic look. Bai Weiwei was pulled along by him as he ran forward. Suddenly, a few black cars rushed in front of them. One of the cars opened its door and a few people wearing masks rushed over. Xia Hanyang frowned. There was more to it? Then his brows relaxed. It was better to have more twists and turns. Then Wei Wei Bai would believe it. However, Wei Wei Bai felt that something was wrong with this group of people. But Xia Hanyang, this idiot, was actually rushing towards the black cars. She immediately pulled him back. "Xia Hanyang, wait." It was too late. The two of them were caught and thrown into the car. The black cars soon disappeared. As for the motorcycle gang members lying on the ground, they looked at each other in dismay. Whose men are they? I don't know. Aren't we the only ones here? In the car, the driver said coldly, "Don't create unnecessary trouble. Why did you suddenly kidnap these two brats?" A man wearing a mask with a scar at the corner of his eye looked coldly at Xia Hanyang. He held a knife in his hand and sneered. "We met a big fish." Xia Hanyang was speechless. Kidnapping? He finally reacted. Wei Wei Bai laughed. Haha. She suddenly doubted that with Xia Hanyang's IQ, how could he complete the task of getting the top student index of 100? Learning also required a brain. //. Chapter 1891. He is the little bastard of the Xia family. Do you know him? He is the only heir of the Xia family. It's easy for him to spend tens of millions of yuan. The man with the knife looked at Xia Hanyang coldly. His eyes were like a poisonous snake, and his temperament was extremely cold and experienced. He was not comparable to those children who played with Xia Hanyang on the street just now. Xia Hanyang moved very slowly and stared at this group of people. He found that everyone seemed to be very leisurely, but no matter their sitting posture or expression, they were very cold, with a murderous aura. Xia Hanyang moved reluctantly and finally protected Wei Wei Bai behind him. He was speechless with himself in his heart. His life was too comfortable. Recently, his attention was drawn away by Wei Wei Bai. Otherwise, he would not have rushed to the black car at once. Now he was in the thieves' den. He even got Wei Wei Bai involved. Xia Hanyang gently fiddled with his watch with his fingers. Although this action was very calm and cautious, it was still discovered. The man with the knife immediately kicked his hand away with one foot and trampled on his watch fiercely. Then he picked up the watch and sneered, "GPS." After that, the man threw the broken watch out of the window. Then he grabbed Xia Hanyang and pinched his neck tightly. "Boy, I don't want to embarrass you. After all, you are very valuable. But don't be too disobedient or you will suffer." Xia Hanyang's eyes were extremely cold, and he was not very afraid. But there was a flame of anger in his dark and gloomy eyes. The man was stunned and sneered. "You are still a wolf cub." After that, he threw Xia Hanyang on the seat. Xia Hanyang did not do anything else, but instinctively hid Wei Wei Bai behind his back. He could feel that Wei Wei Bai's body was leaning against his arm. Her long hair seemed to fall on his shoulder and then slip away. Xia Hanyang was afraid that she would be frightened. He could only grope and stretch his hand back. Finally, he touched her slightly cold fingers. Then, he held her hand tightly, as if he was afraid that something would happen to her. He interlocked his fingers. Wei Wei Bai's fingers seemed to tremble, but she did not break free. The man with the knife looked at them expressionlessly. "Or a pair of lovers?" The driver said, "Well, we can't stay here for too long. We have to hurry. We have to leave tomorrow evening." The man said, "Don't worry. I'll make a call later. We'll earn the money tomorrow morning and leave the city." Xia Hanyang stared at them. He knew that he was in the most terrible situation. This was because they had actually encountered a group of veterans. Furthermore, they were a group of very experienced wolves who wandered in blood and darkness. These people were very difficult to deal with. And it wasn't just once. Because of their attitude, the act of tying him up was a very common thing. Several thoughts flashed through Xia Hanyang's mind. His fingers were so nervous that he even hurt Wei Wei Bai's hand. Wei Wei Bai frowned and suddenly reached out to touch his shoulder as if to comfort him. She whispered, "Xia Hanyang, don't play like this next time." Xia Hanyang stiffened and said, "I'm not playing. I don't know these people." Wei Wei Bai said, "Yes, but I know those people on the street just now. I met one or two of them on the cruise ship." Xia Hanyang blushed. No wonder Wei Wei Bai was not afraid at all just now. It turned out that she knew that it was his trick. This was embarrassing, but this time it was really unexpected. Xia Hanyang didn't know that he was fooling around. He couldn't let the two of them mess around. Wei Wei Bai whispered, "But it's true now." Xia Hanyang wanted to say that he was fooling around, but it was true. The atmosphere was very dignified, and Chapter 1892. As the car drove towards the suburbs, the street lights gradually became sparse and finally turned into darkness. Only the car's headlights were unusually eye-catching. Green hills began to appear outside the car window. Xia Hanyang's expression became more and more solemn. They were directly brought into the mountains. Even if the Xia family wanted to find him quickly, it would be almost impossible. And just now, his and Wei Wei Bai's phones were confiscated. The only good thing now was that the other party did not take off their masks. That was why they did not want to kill them. Wei Wei Bai looked at Xia Hanyang. She listened to the information from the system. She knew that she had encountered a group of inhumane people. She asked the system, "Is it difficult to survive?" The system said, "Yes, this group of people is ruthless. Once they get the money, they might not let you go." There were a few cases before. They all killed the hostages. That was why this group of people had such a strong, murderous aura. Xia Hanyang was too inexperienced to escape in front of so many people. Wei Wei Bai asked the system, "Is there anything to escape?" The system said, "I'll go search, but because of the meeting, many of the supermarket's functional areas will be closed. It may take some time." During the meeting, a large number of systems returned to the system world. The supermarket would be closed immediately. Now that he had returned early, there were not many systems that returned. So the supermarket might not be open to too many people. This was because the supermarket relied on a large number of outgoing systems to survive. Without outgoing systems as customers, to avoid losses, the supermarket would be closed directly. Wei Wei Bai nodded, but did not insist on buying anything. The system was reliable. If it said it did not have anything, it really did not have anything. It would not deliberately kill her. Xia Hanyang kept holding Wei Wei Bai's hand. His palm was sweaty. He was nervous. After much difficulty, the cars finally entered the mountains and arrived at a hunter's wooden house. The wooden house was relatively large and was divided into 3 rooms. Wei Wei Bai and Xia Hanyang were thrown into the smallest wooden house. Then the door was locked. The group of people did not do anything unnecessary. After they went out, 2 people guarded the door while the rest went to eat and drink. He seemed to think that tying them up was a small matter. Xia Hanyang finally breathed a sigh of relief when he saw that they didn't do anything. He was most afraid that those people would molest Wei Wei Bai. Fortunately, they didn't. Xia Hanyang turned around, intending to comfort Wei Wei Bai. She must be scared. When he turned around, he saw that Wei Wei Bai was calmly observing her surroundings. Then she dragged him to the side, away from the wooden door. They sat on 2 stools. Wei Wei Bai said to him seriously, "We were kidnapped." Xia Hanyang looked at her calm face. There was no trace of fear in her eyes. He swallowed the comforting words he was about to say. Bai Wei Wei leaned against him, her leg pressed against his leg. The 2 people's bodies were so close. Their auras and temperatures intertwined. Even at such a tense moment, Xia Hanyang was in a trance for a moment. She leaned close to his ear and whispered, "Remember the address. It's about 3.5 hours journey from here to our city." Their car passed through a mountain road that looks like a cliff. Look at the distribution of the trees. After leaving the wooden house, they must have run south. There's a stream nearby that can lead the way. The more Xia Hanyang listened, the more shocked he became. The road just now was too dark. He also wanted to remember the road, but it was impossible because he couldn't see anything. However, Wei Wei Bai remembered the road. She even gave him a chance to go out. He pulled Wei Wei Bai into the forest. Download the at https://m Sashu. COMT. Chapter 1893. Rely on the road conditions that Wei Wei Bai described. They would definitely be able to escape from here and enter the city. Xia Hanyang finally couldn't help but ask, "Can you see the road?" Wei Wei Bai, "Didn't I tell you that I'm short-sighted?" A short-sighted person actually couldn't see in the dark more than a non-short-sighted person. Xia Hanyang, indeed, she didn't say that. And Wei Wei Bai had never shown a trace of myopia. She didn't squint to look at people, nor did she worry about not being able to see the blackboard clearly. Except for her hazy eyes that were especially beautiful. She was no different from a normal person. Wei Wei Bai sighed. This is the consequence of not studying. I can't see, but I can hear. Every time the car turns, I calculate the formula. The smell of the trees is different. As long as I rely on my sense of smell, I can guess the tree species. And the distribution of the plants allowed people to distinguish where they were. Of course, more importantly, the system said that. For the first time, Xiao Hanyang felt that learning could be so amazing. His eyes lit up as he looked at Wei Wei Bai with a sense of worship. It sounded so amazing. Wei Wei Bai was extremely calm, but she silently said too in her heart. Finally, she seduced Xiao Hanyang to have more motivation to study. After Xiao Hanyang exclaimed, he felt an itch by his ear. He was too nervous and realized that Wei Wei Bai was afraid that someone would hear their conversation. Her whole body was pressed against him, and her soft lips rubbed against his earlobe. His ears were sensitive and turned red immediately. A numb feeling spread from his ear to his cheek, to his neck, and then to his shoulder. Almost half of his body was numb. He slowly exhaled. It was all warm. At this time, he was crazy to still have such thoughts. Wei Wei Bai still said softly, "Don't be nervous. Don't be afraid. Do what they say. Don't get into a conflict with them. Okay?" Xiao Hanyang's brain knew what she was saying, but all of his attention was on her breath, her soft voice in this silent wooden house. There was a different kind of gentleness. He couldn't help but gently nod his head. Sure enough, her lips accidentally brushed past the cheek under his ear. She seemed to be startled and retreated backwards. He wrapped his hand around her waist and pulled her into his embrace. "Don't move. Don't make them suspicious." He put his arms around her and said softly. As expected, Wei Wei Bai didn't move. She obediently leaned against his chest and clasped his arm with her fingers. She seemed a little nervous. Xiao Hanyang whispered, "Don't be afraid. They'll let us go after taking the money. My family has plenty of money." He looked so rich and overbearing. Wei Wei Bai rolled her eyes silently. The system suddenly said while chewing on a biscuit, "The supermarket closed too many shelves. I spent 30 life points to buy a gilly box." Wei Wei Bai asked, "Gilly box?" The system said, "It's like a lottery. Once you use it, there's a 50% chance that you'll be safe." Wei Wei Bai said, "It's better than nothing. Since we've already bought it, why don't you try it?" The system replied, "Yes, let me use it." He then opened the gilly box. A note thanking him appeared inside. The system said, "So, is this useful or not?" Suddenly, there was a flash of lightning outside the window, and a storm came. The people outside immediately closed the door. The storm was too fierce. However, their words could still be heard. "The signal is bad. Can you contact them? The longer we delay, the more anxious they will be. The more room we have for negotiation." Yes. Then there was the sound of lightning and thunder again. Xiao Hanyang suddenly realized something. He reached out and pulled Bai Wei Wei up, then hid her behind him. "If someone comes in, don't make a sound. Hide behind me. /download the at https://m/ Com the button at the bottom to record this chapter. Chapter 1894. Xiao Hanyang had just finished his words. The door suddenly opened, and the man wearing a mask came in. Then he kicked Xiao Hanyang in the stomach without saying a word. Xiao Hanyang didn't react in time. He was kicked and bent over, almost falling to the ground. Wei Wei Bai's pupil shrank. She immediately reached out and hugged him. The man pushed Wei Wei Bai away. He was so strong that Wei Wei Bai fell to the ground without making a sound. Xiao Hanyang had told himself to be patient, but when he saw Wei Wei Bai being pushed out, he exploded. He was about to explode. Without thinking, he raised his fist and punched the guy in the face. It was not a good time to start a conflict, but Xiao Hanyang was full of anger. He wished he could break the man's hand. The man sneered, "Little bastard, you'd better practice for a few more years, you pampered little bastard." After that, he dodged Xiao Hanyang's fist and threw him to the ground. Then he put one knee on Xiao Hanyang's back. After subduing Xiao Hanyang, the man put the phone to his ear, screamed twice, and let your grandfather hear it. Xiao Hanyang guessed right. After the phone was connected, they would let him talk to them before they could get the money. Xiao Hanyang closed his mouth and gloomily looked at the man with a scar on the corner of his eye. His eyes were burning with resentment. The man was stunned. He suddenly got angry and punched Xiao Hanyang hard with his fist. "Talk. Do you want to die?" Xiao Hanyang thought of the scene when Wei Wei Bai was pushed away. He suppressed his embarrassment and anger and didn't want to admit defeat. It seemed that only in this way could he feel less guilty. If it weren't for his evil thoughts, he would not have fallen into the hands of this group of people. The man continued to hit Xia Hanyang. Wei Wei Bai finally got up and stumbled over. She knelt beside Xia Hanyang, bent over and hugged him. Then she looked up and said, "He can talk. Don't hit him." Xia Hanyang trembled. She leaned on him with her whole body. If he punched her, it would fall on her. Xia Hanyang's mind, which had been occupied by anger, suddenly sobered up. He immediately admitted defeat. "I'm talking to my grandfather." For fear that Wei Wei Bai would be targeted, Xia Hanyang immediately got up from the ground and blocked Wei Wei Bai with his body. He picked up the phone, and sure enough, it was his grandfather's voice. "Yang Yang, remember not to resist. Grandpa will save you." "Grandpa." Xia Hanyang swallowed the blood in his throat. His eyes were moist as he whispered, "Grandpa, I'm fine." Just as she finished speaking, her phone was snatched away. The man kicked Xia Hanyang again. This time it was a heavy kick. Xia Hanyang was stunned for a long time. Then the man walked out again. The door closed, and a faint sound could be heard. 80 million in cash, and that's a discount. If you don't pay, just wait to collect your corpse. Wei Wei Bai frowned and quickly pressed Xia Hanyang's abdomen. Xia Hanyang curled up into a ball and gasped in a low voice. "Don't be afraid. They just want money." He was sweating from the pain. She pressed a hand on his forehead. Her fingers were cold to cool down his sweaty forehead. Wei Wei Bai said calmly, "Shut up. Why were you so impulsive just now?" As she spoke, Wei Wei Bai reached out to hold his head and put it on her thigh. Xia Hanyang saw that Wei Wei Bai didn't panic, and his muscles were a little tight and trembling. The pain made him grimace. "Because he pushed you." What Xia Hanyang was most afraid of was that they would hurt Wei Wei Bai or even take a fancy to Wei Wei Bai. Recently, Wei Wei Bai had been very cute because of him. He was worried that those people would take a fancy to her and hurt her. Wei Wei Bai wiped his sweat with her sleeve and said with her head down, "I'm fine. You're protecting me." As soon as this sentence came out, she was deducted points again. But Xia Hanyang's eyes suddenly softened. He moved his lips. "I'm afraid." The thunderstorm outside was getting heavier. Xia Hanyang's voice was filled with fear. "I'm afraid that we will die here, and I'm afraid that they will be rude to you." This kind of thing had happened before. Wei Wei Bai stared at him blankly for a while. After all, he was a teenager. No matter how brave he was, of course he would be afraid. She suddenly whispered, "Don't be afraid. It's okay. Xia Hanyang, I'm with you." She clasped his fingers with her hand, and for the first time, Xia Hanyang felt that she was so close to him. He thought that she didn't like him. She had always been cold. But now his heart was filled with a huge surprise. If this wasn't love, then what was it? Xia Hanyang pulled out a smile, which was a little ugly and naive because of the pain. "Ding! The male lead's favorability has increased to 70. Wei Wei Bai, if you're really so afraid, let's do something else to divert your attention." Xia Hanyang stared at her lips and nodded excitedly. Then he saw Wei Wei Bai take out a small notebook and calmly say, "I'm not afraid of memorizing the formula. There's still time. Let's review our homework quickly." Xia Hanyang, the fast, the fast slash, the fast comma. Chapter 1895. Time was extremely hard to bear. Outside the window, the rainstorm continued. In the darkness, only the sound of the storm was very clear. On the contrary, Wei Wei Bai's voice was unusually weak and gentle, almost drowned out by the sound of the rainstorm. If x equals a, then x is the square root of a. If x equals a to the third power, then x is the cube root of a. She was very serious about reviewing junior high school basic questions for him. Xia Hanyang understood these. After all, he had been reviewing the knowledge of square roots and cube roots during this period of time. He had also read a lot of questions about this. She held a small notebook and read softly while reaching out to touch his hair and let his head rest on her soft thigh. This position made Xia Hanyang feel comfortable and safe. Even the fear of being kidnapped slowly calmed down. She was calm, tolerant, and gentle. Even when she was explaining the questions, he felt that she left a deeper impression on him than any other time. The hard floor with grit and dust, the damp air, and the old lights that were almost scrapped. There was also Wei Wei Bai's soft voice. It relieved the pain in Xia Hanyang's body. He half opened his eyes. His eyes were dark and bright, like a fire in the dark night, but also like flowing water. He stared at Wei Wei Bai like this. Wei Wei Bai didn't have much reaction. Instead, she calmly held a small notebook for reviewing and explained junior high school basic questions to him. Then she heard the top student index rise. Did this mean that Xia Hanyang could actually listen to her explanation in such a difficult environment? Originally, all her points had been deducted. If she was too gentle to Xia Hanyang again, she would be punished. But because Xia Hanyang listened to these questions and understood them, his top student index rose to 20. And she also got an extra 15 points as a reward. Bai Weiwei felt that when she was comfortable, she was going to give a lecture to the point where she had to hang up. Xia Hanyang hesitated to increase his top student index. However, when he came to the deep mountains and forests, his index rose automatically. What did this mean? It meant that Xia Hanyang, this fool, deserved a beating. In the future, would he find a godforsaken place where birds don't shit? The more difficult, the better. It would only be effective if he were to study for him. Bai Weiwei's mind ran through the nearby villages. Why don't they go to the countryside to study in the future? Xia Hanyang stared at Weiwei Bai's snow-white face, which was as white as a piece of pear pulp and ice. White and clear. During this period of time, he had really fed her until she was too cute. Otherwise, how could the number of love letters increase so quickly? He couldn't bear to let her change her hairstyle, and the clothes she chose were comfortable and inconspicuous. Because she was so adorable. If she were to dress up so meticulously, wouldn't she be attracting wild bees and flirtatious butterflies? Xia Hanyang would be tired if he held a fly swatter every day. However, he felt that the way Wei Wei Bai looked at him was a little strange. It was so strange that it was cute. The people outside the door were very professional. It seemed that they had caught Xia Hanyang in passing. Wei Wei Bai asked the system to keep an eye on it. Then, he would help Xia Hanyang with his revision. It was a good idea to calm Xia Hanyang down. After all, Xia Hanyang had a very bad temper. If he suddenly couldn't bear it and went against him, they would probably meet God early. Seeing that Xia Hanyang had calmed down, Wei Wei Bai breathed a sigh of relief. However, the system suddenly said, "Think of a way to escape. These people want to kill the hostage." Wei Wei Bai asked, "Why so sudden?" The system said their address was discovered. They hid it very well, but Xia Hanyang not only has a GPS device on his watch, but he also has a GPS device on his sneakers. So, the Xia family still found him. At https://www.sashu.com/full-text https://www.sashu.com download text at https://www.sashu.com at https://m/sashu.com/. Chapter 1896. They had hidden it well. They wanted to sneak into the wooden house, but these kidnappers were very professional. A guard at the door noticed something was wrong. These people were planning to kill them both. Wei Wei Bai asked, "Why does Xia Hanyang have a bunch of GPS systems on him?" The system said his grandfather worries about him being kidnapped every day. The nanny would always put the GPS systems on his clothes, video, car, and all kinds of inconspicuous places. As long as Xia Hanyang was wearing clothes, riding a bike, or wearing any accessories, it was possible that there was something that could locate them. Xia Hanyang didn't know a lot of them. Wei Wei Bai asked, "The lucky box can't save us?" The system sighed. "Who knows, this thing will only rain." After opening the lucky box, there was a thank you message, followed by a rainstorm. So they were unlucky and wasted 30 days of life points. Wei Wei Bai frowned and looked at Xia Hanyang. With just the two of them and without superpowers, it was impossible to escape from here. The house was too sturdy. She had observed the surroundings just now. There was no place to escape. The only place to hide was the cellar in this room. But after entering the cellar, they still couldn't escape. Xia Hanyang was listening to Wei Wei Bai's soft lecture, but she suddenly went silent. Her delicate eyebrows furrowed, and there was a trace of uneasiness in her eyes. Xia Hanyang immediately stood up and reached out to hold her cold fingers. "What's wrong?" he asked in a low voice. Wei Wei Bai couldn't tell him directly that the two of them were going to die. "Nothing, I just have a bad feeling." Xia Hanyang's heart twitched when he heard it. He felt terrible. Knowing this situation, Wei Wei Bai couldn't really not be afraid no matter how calm she was. His fingers gripped her hand tightly. He whispered, "Don't be afraid, I'll protect you." When Xia Hanyang said this, he didn't act impulsively, but very calmly. Wei Wei Bai shook her head. "They might kill us." Xia Hanyang pursed his lips tightly. He suddenly looked at the locked wooden door. When he was thrown in, he checked his surroundings with his eyes. It was the same conclusion as Wei Wei Bai. There was only a cellar here. Everything had been taken away. There was nothing left. That was why this group of people were so relieved to throw them together and didn't even bother to tie them up. After all, they didn't have any weapons on them. The people outside were all experienced criminals, all of them tall and strong. Furthermore, he was cautious and cruel. Xia Hanyang was not a real foppish playboy who had a hole in his head. As soon as he saw those people, he restrained himself, because he knew that he couldn't escape from so many experienced bad guys by himself. Not to mention, he had Wei Wei Bai by his side. Xia Hanyang's palms were sweaty, but he was still calm. "It's okay. They just want money. And I know they must have committed a big crime and planned to escape. I was caught by them, by the way, so they won't cause any trouble. These people only wanted money." He was very clear. It was definitely urgent for his family to raise 80 million in cash in one night. However, it was not an unbearable amount. Wei Wei Bai still wanted to say something. Suddenly, the door opened and two men wearing masks rushed in. "Damn it, this little brat must not have been searched thoroughly. The closest car to us is only about 3 kilometers away. We're about to be found. Forget the money. Let's leave first. I told you not to catch this little brat. He's really causing trouble." Chapter 1897. The men were complaining to each other. One of the men had already walked in front of Xia Hanyang with a knife. His eyes were cold and calm. "I'm sorry, kid. Your parents don't know what's good for you, so you have to pay the price." When Xia Hanyang heard their words, his pupils constricted violently. He knew that there must be something on him that could locate his location. Then, his grandfather came looking for him, wanting to rescue him before dawn. In the end, things were pushed to the point of no return. If he died, he would drag Wei Wei Bai down with him. He had not studied hard, he had not scored full marks, and he had not received Wei Wei Bai's reward. Wei Wei Bai had not entered university, she had not lived the good life he had given her, she had not married him, had children, and grew old together with him. In the end, the two of them were going to be buried here, forever. Xia Hanyang thought of a lot of things in a flash, but when the knife came down, he was stunned. He had already dragged Wei Wei Bai to the side to avoid the knife. Then he saw the wooden planks in the cellar and planned to use force to lift the planks, wanting to push Wei Wei Bai down. Then he would press the planks so that the group of people could not hurt her. There was no lock on the planks in the cellar, so if they went down, they would not be able to hide. Wei Wei Bai knew what Xia Hanyang was thinking. What a hot-blooded young man. Although he was a bad student, his desire to protect and this sense of responsibility forcefully increased the favorability from 70 to 100. Wei Wei Bai felt that Xia Hanyang was not completely useless. Other than having a screw loose in his head, he was quite good. Wei Wei Bai was still looking for life-saving items with the system. The system said, "Most of the supermarkets are not open. They are all trash. Those that are useful are too expensive. They are worth 100 to 200,000 life points." Wei Wei Bai said, "Anything is fine. We're going to be buried together." The system said, "Only life support is left." When they spoke, it was only a short 1 or 2 seconds. Xia Hanyang didn't have time to open the door because another strong man rushed over and kicked him hard. Xia Hanyang hurriedly dodged and bumped into Wei Wei Bai. Wei Wei staggered, and her whole body fell backwards. Behind her, the man with the knife had already come over and was about to stab Wei Wei Bai in the back. Xiao Hanyang's pupils constricted, and his mind was torn apart. Wei Wei dodged. Wei Wei Bai looked at him blankly, but suddenly felt a vibration under the floor. Her body floated and brushed past the knife. The tip of the knife brushed past her clothes, but it didn't hurt her. Then, she fell heavily to the ground. Xiao Hanyang threw caution to the wind and rushed over to hold her in his arms. The two of them rolled into a ball. The shaking of the floor was getting more and more obvious. The men in the room frowned. What's going on? It looks like an earthquake. Xiao Hanyang also felt the unusual vibration under the floor. Moreover, in the midst of the torrential rain, an incomparable rumbling sound could be heard. It sounded like it came from the sky from a relatively distant place. It was getting closer and closer. The system said loudly in Wei Wei Bai's ear, "Don't move, don't move, there's a mudslide in the storm." Wei Wei Bai was shocked. What the hell? What's with this sudden disaster? The men's expressions changed, and a strong sense of crisis made them run for the door. Let's go, it's an earthquake. This was not a joke. It was not uncommon for a real earthquake to be crushed to death by a house. Chapter 1898. Xiao Hanyang also felt the vibration of the earthquake. His face was a little pale. He held Wei Wei Bai tightly and said, "Let's run away too." He pulled her and rushed to the door. But the door was locked, and the group of men were about to open the door of the cabin and run out. Boom! A beam collapsed, just outside the door in the hall. 1/3 of the cabin was broken. 2 people were killed on the spot. Seeing this scene, Xiao Hanyang knew that the collapse of the cabin would soon affect this small cabin. He stepped back and raised his foot to kick the door hard. These bastards locked him and Wei Wei Bai so that the cabin would collapse and kill them. And there was a benefit to being buried in this ruin. To save people, his grandfather would not track them down. The door was too strong. They did not cut corners at all. Xiao Hanyang's legs were numb. He only left a mark on the door, but he still could not kick it open. Wei Wei Bai heard the prompt of the system. Hurry up and stand in the area I calculated on the plank that covers the cellar. Stand there. Xiao Hanyang intended to continue to kick the door, but Wei Wei recklessly dragged him towards the wooden plank. Xiao Hanyang frowned. Wei Wei, we have to open the door and get out. He thought that Wei Wei Bai was frightened and ran around. Wei Wei Bai did not explain. She ran directly to the plank under the cellar and then held his waist tightly, not letting him move. Believe me, Xiao Hanyang, don't move if you don't want to die. Her voice was very anxious. Xiao Hanyang paused. Seeing the nervous expression on her face, he even began to sweat on her forehead. He moved his lips, but in fact he was so nervous that his muscles were twitching. But he was a man, so he did not dare to reveal his fear too much. He suddenly hugged her. In the sound of the room collapsing, the dust of the plank began to fly in the cabin. Wei Wei, I'm sorry. His voice was a little choked up. I'm the one who dragged you into this. If we can get out of here alive, I'll promise you anything you want. Wei Wei was pressed against his chest, and the two of them were pressed very close together. They almost merged into one. Their body temperatures intertwined, and fear and trembling were also transmitted to each other. Wei Wei Bai reached out and hugged his waist, whispering, "Trust me, nothing will happen." Xiao Hanyang didn't believe it and was about to say something. Rumble. An intense sound pierced through his eardrums. A terrifying mudslide smashed through the house and rushed over. Xiao Hanyang's back was injured by several planks, but it wasn't serious. He just felt a little pain. His bones were not broken. Xiao Hanyang groaned. The sound behind him was like the roar of a monster, which was horrifying. He turned around and saw a terrifying scene. A powerful mudslide just happened to pass through more than half of the house, and the place where they were standing was just right without being affected. It was crazy, a godlike miracle. The people who caught them just now were basically buried by the mudslide. Xiao Hanyang couldn't help but ask in a trembling voice, "What's going on? We're fine." Wei Wei Bai said, "The speed of a mudslide has a summary formula. As long as we calculate it in advance, we know where it's going, and also know where it's safe system. To make the male lead learn, the host had gone to the point of insanity. Even Superman couldn't calculate the mudslide formula like this. Xiao Hanyang felt that learning was such a divine tool. The system finally couldn't stand it. Stop learning. Run. It worked so hard to find a safe place for them. But was it easy? These two learning bitches had enough. Wei Wei Bai nodded and was about to pull Xiao Hanyang away. The system suddenly said, "It's too late." The magic power of the Geely box was up. It couldn't last until they were safe. The house completely collapsed. Wei Wei Bai and Xiao Hanyang's place was not safe either. Wei Wei Bai pushed Xiao Hanyang out almost instantly. Fortunately, there was no more mudslide, otherwise Xiao Hanyang would have died when she pushed him out. All the houses collapsed in the violent rain. His whole body was smashed by stones and wood, but he didn't suffer the most terrible burial. Xiao Hanyang crouched on the broken house, but saw Wei Wei Bai buried under the broken wood. Her fingers hung limply on a piece of splintered wood, and blood flowed from her wrist. Xiao Hanyang's body was cold, his mind blank. He suddenly crawled over, trembling, and grabbed her hand tightly. Wei Wei? Wei Wei! Wei Wei Bai was buried under. She was stuck in a crack, but she didn't die. She weakly responded. Xiao Hanyang suddenly trembled, his heart aching as he looked at the blood all over the ground. He broke out with unimaginable strength, desperately reaching out to the wood and stones, and shouted in a trembling voice, hold on. Live for me. Wei Wei Bai." Wei Wei Bai's voice was so broken that it was almost inaudible. Xiao Hanyang, in fact, it was not safe here. Under the heavy rain, the mudslide could happen again. Xiao Hanyang was hysterical. "I won't go. You have to live for me. As long as you live, I will listen to you." Wei Wei Bai was silent for a moment, and then said weakly, "What will listen to me?" Xiao Hanyang burst into tears. "I'll listen to you. I'll listen to you." Wei Wei Bai's voice trembled. "Then you study hard, Xiao Hanyang." Poof, he finally couldn't help but spit out a mouthful of blood. // that you're tuning into the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.